Chapter 63. Just now, when Chu Qingyin was in the carriage, she had already noticed the stall selling sugar figurines. So when Xiao Su agreed, she immediately rushed over like a wild horse. Gu Rong and Gui felt even more uncomfortable. How could there be such a person who would not only walk in front of their master, but also run so fast? They originally thought that their master would scold her for not following the rules, but looking at their master's expression, it seemed that he didn't care about Chu Qingyin's violation of the rules at all. The two of them could only keep silent. Chu Qingyin ran to the front of the stall, and like many other children of her age, she stared at the craftsman. She saw that the craftsman first used an oil felt to gently rub on the stone slab, and then used a very delicate small copper spoon to scoop out a little syrup. Then, he tilted it slightly, and the syrup slowly flowed out. The craftsman immediately lifted it up, and the golden syrup seemed to be hanging in midair. Following that, the beneficiary's wrist nimbly moved up and down. She didn't know how he did it, but a lively little monk appeared. Then, when the sugar figurine cooled and took shape, the craftsman added 2 drops of sugar paste on it and quickly stuck it on a bamboo stick. Then, he casually stuck it on the straw handle and continued to repeat the action just now. Chu Qingyin was dazzled. This was the traditional culture passed down from ancient times. She was amazed by the breadth and profoundness of the 5,000 years of culture. When she was in Yugu City, she had seen it before, but she wasn't as skilled as the craftsman in front of her. There were so many patterns. Looking at the increasing number of sugar figurines, animals, flowers, and plants on the straw handle, she couldn't help but be entranced. Cough, cough. Chu Qingyin was startled back to reality by the sound beside her. She turned her head and found that Gu Rong was staring at her, and Gui's expression was also very bad. Chu Qingyin then remembered the person behind her. She was a little annoyed. How could she forget about him? She didn't know if he was angry. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but slowly turn her head to look at the person behind her. She stole a glance at him, trying to see if he was angry from his expression. Xiao Su, who was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, had originally seen her staring at the craftsman's every move with a serious expression. She looked like an inexperienced little rabbit who was curious about everything. However, at this moment, she turned her head and looked at him with a fawning expression. Xiao Su had no experience in taking care of children. If it was in the past, he wouldn't have been able to guess what she was thinking. However, after reading the parenting manuals his subordinates had given him, he often took them out to study and explore the knack of it. At this moment, he remembered that one of his aides had written that when a child saw candy, their eyes would light up. They would always act spoiled and shamelessly ask adults to buy them. Occasionally, they could buy some to give the child a little sweetness. Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. You want it? Chu Qingyin could not follow his train of thought. What? Meanwhile, the craftsmen in the stall had long noticed these people who were dressed out of the ordinary. However, due to their unapproachable aura, they had not asked. Now that the noble man in the lead had spoken, the craftsman immediately welcomed them with a smile. Dear customer, which one do you like? I'll get it for you. Chu Qingyin glanced at the craftsman, then looked at Xiao Su. Seeing that his expression was indifferent and noncommittal, Chu Qingyin finally understood what he meant. She breathed a sigh of relief and was instantly elated. With Xiao Su's permission, she carefully picked out the clay figurines on the straw handle. Unfortunately, they were all very lifelike, so she didn't know which one to choose. Xiao Su saw that she was hesitating for a long time and became a little impatient. He said to the craftsman, We'll take all of these. Chu Qingyin was shocked. She quickly waved her hand and casually pointed at one. This one will do. If it was like what he said and he bought all of them, she wouldn't be able to eat so much. Xiao Su ignored her and stared at the craftsman. Seeing that he had met a generous customer, the craftsman quickly picked up all the sugar figurines on the straw handle. As he worked, he smiled at Chu Qingyin and said, Miss, you're so lucky to have such a good father. Everyone's faces darkened. Gu Rong and Gu Yi, nonsense. My lord hasn't married yet. How could he have a child? Chu Qingyin, Big Ice Cube won't be angry, right? Xiao Su did not react. Chu Qingyin was surprised, but she still hurriedly explained, Boss, don't misunderstand. This is my family's young master. I'm just a servant. This time, it was the craftsman's turn to be shocked. These two did not look like master and servant. Moreover, how could a master accommodate a servant and even buy things for her? If it was really as this girl said, then he could only say that you city people really knew how to have fun. Chu Qingyin was holding a dignified sugar figurine in her hand. Somewhat overwhelmed by the favor, she pulled the sleeve of the person beside her and said softly, "You bought too much." Xiao Su glanced at her and said indifferently, "This prince never mistreats his own people." Chu Qingyin stood there in a daze. Not mistreating her own people? Was she hallucinating? Was she already acknowledged? Perhaps it was because she hadn't reacted for a long time, and the crowd was slowly increasing. So Xiao Su didn't think too much about it and pulled her forward to avoid a carriage that was speeding towards them. "Let's go." Xiao Su let go of her and took the lead to walk away. Chu Qingyin lowered her head to look at her wrist. That cold touch did not seem to have dissipated from her skin. Chu Qingyin chuckled and followed the person in front of her. Gu Rong and Gu Yi, who were shocked by the scene in front of them again and again, lowered their heads to look at their hands full of sugar figurines. They felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Everything was an illusion, right? The craftsman at the side was dumbfounded as he watched the two people walking further and further away. Didn't they say that they were master and servant? What's going on? You city people really knew how to have fun. The dazzling array of goods and cosmetics dazzled Chu Qingyan. In addition, she felt that the people around her really treated her like a child. Chu Qingyan no longer restrained herself and walked around looking. Whenever she saw something, Xiao Su would order someone to buy it. Chu Qingyan felt more and more that this cold lord was quite humane. It was just that the two bodyguards had to suffer because their hands were full of small things that they bought along the way. Xiao Su followed behind her. Although his steps seemed casual, he was always at least 3 steps away from Chu Qingyan. Every time Chu Qingyan turned her head, she would be able to see him. Then she would feel at ease and continue to play with the things on the stall. Chu Qingyan felt that sometimes it was quite strange. He was obviously such a noble and indifferent person. She thought that he would dislike this kind of bustling city, but she did not expect him to be so calm and not show any dissatisfaction. This made Chu Qingyan snort in amazement. When they were almost done shopping, Chu Qingyan walked side by side with him. At this time, the number of people slowly increased. Perhaps it was because the rain had finally cleared up after a few days, but many people came out to walk. Chu Qingyan's shoulder was bumped by someone, and she was almost pushed down. Just as she was frowning, a pair of large hands took her small hand and retreated to the side. Then he waited for the crowd to pass before letting go of her hand. "Pay attention to the road. Don't look left and right." This lecturing tone really sounded like a father lecturing his daughter. Chu Qingyan was amused by the idea that popped into her head. She humbly nodded. "I understand, young master. You want to see your father?" When they reached a secluded place, Xiao Su seemed to speak casually. Chu Qingyan, who was playing with the little things in her hands, suddenly brightened. "Yes. Can I?" Because Chu Qingyan disliked the white veil blocking her vision, she had already lifted it. At this time, a pair of large eyes were especially bright as she looked at him. Xiao Su did not say anything, but continued to walk forward. The veil covered his expression, so Chu Qingyan could not see what he was thinking. Moreover, he did not say anything and ignored her. She was a little anxious, so in her anxiety, she did something that was instinctive and shocking. Chapter 64. In a moment of desperation, Chu Qingyan couldn't care about anything else. She ran up to him and reached out to grab his sleeve. However, a gust of wind blew, and she missed the corner of his sleeve. Instead, she stumbled and grabbed onto something cold and soft. Xiao Su narrowed his eyes and subconsciously wanted to fling this person away. However, when he lowered his head and saw a pair of watery eyes, he was slightly dazed and stopped himself. Chu Qingyan didn't expect that she would grab onto his wrist in a moment of panic. The coldness traveled from her palm to her heart, and she couldn't help but shiver. However, it was too late for regrets. She tightened her grip on his hand and looked up at him stubbornly. "Lord, what do you mean by what you said just now?" Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. This girl usually looked like a yes-man to him and didn't have any temper at all. However, when it came to her family matters, her true nature was revealed. However, to be honest, this side of her was more pleasing to the eye. You'll know when you catch up. Xiao Su didn't intend to say anything more and turned to leave. Unfortunately, the person beside him hadn't reacted yet and refused to let go of his hand. Xiao Su was a little impatient. He used a little more strength and easily broke free of her hand. Chu Qingyan looked at the handsome figure slowly disappearing into the crowd and bit her lips. Her emotions were no longer as agitated as before. She calmed herself down and understood that if he did not tell her, no matter how much she asked, he would not tell her. Hence, she heaved a sigh of relief and quickly ran towards that person. Gu Rong and Gui looked at each other. This was the first time that someone could touch Lord and come out unscathed. They looked at Chu Qingyan in disbelief. For some reason, Chu Qingyan felt that she couldn't keep up with the person in front of her. It was a little strenuous to jog. She rolled her eyes at him. Didn't he know the difference in physical strength between men and women? Didn't he know that her legs were shorter? In the end, she had no choice. Worried that she would lose him, Chu Qingyan reached out to hold his finger without thinking. In any case, so many people had mistaken him for her father along the way. It was natural for a daughter to hold her father's hand, wasn't it? Although Xiao Su was walking in front, he was paying attention to what was behind him. When he saw her reach out her hand, he instinctively wanted to avoid it, but in the end, he didn't know why he didn't move away. That pair of soft, boneless hands were embedded in his palm, like a budding flower bud being held in his palm. His fingers were slightly stiff, and he didn't move at all. If the flower bud was too light, it would fall off. If it was too heavy, it would be crushed. After putting her hand in his, Chu Qingyan was still looking at the gauze hat, but she couldn't see anything special about it. However, she felt that it was a good sign that he didn't shake her off. Since he treated her like a child, then she should properly exercise her rights as a child and build a good relationship with him. Her life would be better in the future. Chu Qingyan completely didn't realize that perhaps it was from this step that she and he began to fall. After testing it out, Chu Qingyan boldly opened her fingers and firmly held his hand. She wanted to see how he was going to shake her off like this. Her tender fingers were warm, and they were wrapped around his fingertips. They seeped into his skin and into his blood. They broke through the ice and gradually merged into his heart. A crack appeared in his frozen heart, and that wisp of fragrance wormed its way in. Perhaps her journey of breaking through the ice quietly began at this moment. He couldn't help but lower his head to look at the person beside him. Her tender face was as innocent as a child, and her large watery eyes flashed with a hint of success. He should have reprimanded her for her rudeness, but at the last moment, he tightened his grip on her fingers and held them tightly in his palm. His footsteps also slowed down, and he looked forward. His tone was still indifferent. Watch the road. Chu Qingyan immediately looked forward and saw a man in his prime pushing a wooden cart with wooden buckets coming towards them. She immediately dodged to his side and patted her chest. She was no longer distracted and followed the person beside him closely. Thus, this small accident made her forget about their interaction just now. She held his hand tightly, afraid that another accident would happen. This father and daughter pair is so handsome. Just by looking at their figures, I can feel that they are extraordinary. The passers-by noticed the two of them and couldn't help but sigh. Chu Qingyan felt that it was funny, but she also felt that Xiao Su was wronged. He hadn't even started a family yet, but he was already labeled as the father of a 10-year-old child. She wondered if he was sullen in his heart. Xiao Su never paid attention to such gossip, so when the exclamations of the passers-by reached his ears, he just held the person in his hand tightly and strode forward calmly. On the other hand, Gu Rong and Gu Yi, who were carrying a large pile of things behind them, stared at the passers-by with eyes as sharp as knives. At the same time, they were full of shock. Lord actually allowed that girl to hold his hand. It was simply too inconceivable. Chu Qingyan also didn't know where he was going. She only felt that the more they walked, the fewer people there were and the more comfortable the air was. At this time, Xiao Su stopped at a restaurant. Chu Qingyan followed his line of sight and looked up at the plaque, Yellow Crane Tower. The dark gold strokes were inlaid on the dark red plaque, revealing a grand atmosphere. She couldn't help but think of a poem that she had learned before. The people of the past had already left on the Yellow Crane, leaving the Yellow Crane Tower empty. The Yellow Crane left and never returned. The white clouds lingered in the sky for 1,000 years. Perhaps the name of this place came from this poem. However, she didn't know if this dynasty had experienced the Tang dynasty, because this dynasty had never appeared in her memory. Perhaps the textbooks had missed it and didn't record it. As Xiao Su stepped into the restaurant, the aroma of food greeted them. Chu Qingyan thought, could it be that he wanted to have lunch here? Then what about the matter of meeting her parents? Even though she had doubts in her heart, Chu Qingyan still calmed down and followed him. Under the warm greetings of the waiter, their group went up to the second floor. At this time, a black-clothed man came up with a smile, "Master." Chu Qingyan remembered this person. When Xiao Ran wanted to punish her, he was the one who stopped him. She was a bit puzzled as to why he would appear here. Hua Ling's sharp eyes saw the hands that were held together, and a surprised and complicated expression flashed in his eyes. "Where is she?" Xiao Su looked at him. Hua Ling smiled and said, "I've already brought her here. You can rest assured with this subordinate taking care of things." Chu Qingyan didn't understand their questions and answers, but there was a strong thought in her heart. She couldn't help but look at Xiao Su. "The person you want to see is inside," Xiao Su lightly said to her. Chu Qingyan's face lit up with joy. She wanted to run in, but she thought of something and could only look at him eagerly. She looked like a little dog wagging its tail. Xiao Su raised his hand and pinched her cheek, then said generously, "Go in." Chu Qingyan immediately pushed open the door and stepped in as if she had been pardoned. The two people who were playing the red string game inside were shocked and then delighted. "Kai, you're here." The family of three was finally reunited. Chu Qingyan threw herself into Mother Chu's arms and said in a choked voice, "Mother, Father, I missed you so much." Mother Chu's eyes were also wet. "Kai, Mother missed you too." Father Chu opened his arms and hugged the two of them, imitating Mother Chu's words and sobbing, "Kai, Mother missed you too." Xiao Su watched this happy and harmonious scene from outside the door, and a faint shadow flashed across his eyes. Since he was young, this kind of warmth had been very far away from him, and he had always been a bystander. Chu Qingyan only then remembered that Xiao Su had actually left her to the side. She hurriedly turned to introduce her parents to him, but she didn't expect her father to rush up before her. Because they had entered the private room, Xiao Su casually took off his veil and revealed his silver mask, but he didn't expect someone to rush up to him and shout happily, "Son-in-law, it's me, father." Chapter 65. Father Chu's shout instantly drew everyone's attention, and at the same time, he broke out in cold sweat. Chu Qingyan covered her face. "Daddy, don't mess around." Mother Chu's face was pale. "Yuan Lang, restrain yourself. This is not an ordinary person." Gu Rong and Gu Yi despised. Birds of a feather flock together, like daughter like father. Xiao Su looked at the person who suddenly appeared in front of him, and the bad memories of Mao Village came to his mind. His eyes dimmed, and he said coldly, "Old Master Chu, you've recognized the wrong person." Father Chu immediately shook his head like a rattle drum, his eyes still shining. "Inverted scallion, how could I forget you, my son-in-law? Don't forget, I've hugged you before. That's why I've always remembered your figure. Being hugged by a man is not a good thing." Xiao Su's face was cold, and he looked at Chu Qingyan like an arrow. Chu Qingyan received the instructions from the cold-faced lord and immediately jumped over, pulling her father back and persuading in a low voice, "Dad, he's the eldest prince of the royal family. How could he be an inverted scallion? You must have remembered it wrongly." Mother Chu also came up to persuade. "Yuan Lang, don't mess around. This is Lord. Let's go to the side and play." Father Chu straightened his neck and insisted on turning his head to shout at Xiao Su, "Liar, even if you're Lord, you're still my inverted scallion son-in-law. If you don't believe me, let me hug you again. I'll make you accept it wholeheartedly." Xiao Su's face darkened instantly. Gui said angrily, "How dare you? Lord's status is honorable. How can you blaspheme him?" Father Chu was shaken by Gu Yi's ferocious roar. He suddenly began to sob. With an aggrieved expression, he pulled his daughter's hand and pointed in Xiao Su's direction, sobbing, "Kai, you don't recognize your father anymore. He promised to weave a fishing net for me. He didn't keep his word." Then he glared at Xiao Su, "Liar." Then, she turned to her daughter and complained pitifully. Chu Qingyin was a little embarrassed. What's wrong with her father today? Why did he suddenly hold on to Xiao Su and not let go? The two clearly had nothing to do with each other, and it was impossible for them to have anything to do with each other. But why was her father so angry when he saw Xiao Su? That day in the village, she and her father had indeed saved a man. After that, the man left them some money and left. She didn't expect that her father would still miss him. Even after a few months, he still couldn't forget about him. However, her father had never lied. Chu Qingyin found it strange and couldn't help but stare at Xiao Su carefully. She tried to recall the characteristics of that person, but she couldn't figure anything out. She rubbed her nose, but still held on to her father dutifully, in case he did something inappropriate again. With Xiao Su's group around, Mother Chu didn't know how to start a private conversation with her daughter. Instead, Chu Qingyin kept asking her mother about their recent situation. Mother Chu Qingyin was afraid of outsiders, so she kept her mouth shut. The happy Chu Qingyin also gradually sensed that the atmosphere wasn't right, and she looked at Xiao Su awkwardly. Xiao Su knew his place, so he stood up and said coldly to Chu Qingyin, "1 hour?" What he meant was that he would only give her an hour to reminisce. Chu Qingyin smiled at him gratefully, thinking that the big ice cube was sometimes quite considerate. Although it was only 1 hour, she was already satisfied. Xiao Su was about to leave, but when he turned around, he saw Father Chu blocking the door. Father Chu had been glaring at him from the side. Although he didn't want to admit that he was the one, it didn't affect Father Chu's judgment. Father Chu trusted his intuition very much, and when he saw that Xiao Su was about to leave, he immediately stopped him. "Old Master Chu, what are you doing?" Gui was a little angry. They had been impatient with Lord being pestered by this idiot again and again today, but Lord didn't seem to mind, so they endured it. Now that he was blocking the way, they were furious. Father Chu raised his head and said proudly, "With me here, don't even think of taking a step out." Chu Qingyin didn't understand why her father was so obsessed with Xiao Su. She went up to Xiao Su in a panic and apologized, "Lord, my father doesn't mean any harm. Please be magnanimous and don't take offense." Xiao Su looked at the person blocking the door like a door god and frowned slightly. This prince's patience is limited. What he meant was that he wanted Chu Qingyin to solve it quickly. "You can't leave, Kai. You can't let him leave. Last time, he sneaked away. It wasn't easy for us to see him again. If we let him slip away this time, when will we see him again? Father's fishing net hasn't been finished yet." Father Chu blinked his teary eyes, looking like a child who had lost his favorite toy. Everyone was dumbfounded. Only Chu Qingyin and Mother Chu were left dumbfounded. However, this put Chu Qingyin in a difficult position. On one side was her father, and on the other side was the ice cube. She couldn't offend the ice cube, but she didn't want her father to be sad. In the end, Chu Qingyin could only turn to look at the tall person in front of her helplessly. "Lord, my father seems to like you a lot. Can you stay for a while?" Father Chu's ears immediately perked up. Xiao Su frowned as he looked at Father Chu, whose eyes were darting around. He then looked at Chu Qingyin, who was in a difficult position. In the end, he did not say anything. Instead, he walked to another table and sat down, leaving the family of 3 alone. Huoling's eyes widened. It was rare to see Lord being so easy to talk to. Chu Qingyin heaved a sigh of relief and thanked Xiao Su from the bottom of her heart. Then, she pulled her father back to their original table. Mother Chu helplessly patted Father Chu's hand and scolded softly, "You're always causing trouble. Let's see who will clean you up in the future." Father Chu raised his chin and said proudly, "Don't be afraid." Mother and daughter shook their heads helplessly at Father Chu. However, it wasn't until the end that they realized what a prophecy was. Father Chu wasn't blindly confident. Therefore, it was either Chu Qingyin's mother talking to Chu Qingyin, while Chu Qingyin's father was listening and looking at Xiao Su, Or Chu Qingyin's mother was talking, while Chu Qingyin's father was interrupting and looking at Xiao Su. Anyway, no matter what, half of Father Chu's attention was on Xiao Su. It was as if he was afraid that Xiao Su would run away. Chu Qingyin was very embarrassed, but there was nothing she could do. She could only let her father do whatever he wanted. However, when she thought about how her father would be returning to the Chu family in an hour, she didn't know how to tell him not to worry about the ice cube. This gave her a headache. An hour later, Father Chu shamelessly refused again. No, Father won't go. Father wants us to live together as a family of 4. Father. Chu Qingyin felt helpless and sad. Actually, she didn't want to be separated from her parents either. At the side, Xiao Su seemed to be touched by something. The coldness in his eyes faded slightly. He stood with his hands behind his back and said calmly to Father Chu, who was about to cry, "After a while, I'll arrange for you to catch up." Really? Father Chu looked at him with tears in his eyes.
Yes.
After receiving his affirmation, Chu Feng's father immediately stopped crying, and under everyone's dumbfounded gazes, he solemnly patted Xiao Su's shoulder and said earnestly, "Son-in-law, I'll leave my Kai to you. Don't miss Daddy too much. Danyang, let's go." Therefore, everyone's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets as they watched Chu Machen's father leave. Chapter 66. Kai watched her parents leave. She was a little embarrassed to face Xiao Su. She hadn't expected her father to do that. "Lord, my father was rude today. Please don't take it to heart." Under his gaze, Chu Qingyin's voice became softer and softer. She couldn't continue. Xiao Su looked at her hands fidgeting unnaturally and said mildly, "Don't do it again." Gu Rong and Gui had suffered enough shocks today. Seeing that Lord forgave them so easily, they didn't find it strange anymore. Chu Qingyin found it hard to believe. The big ice block had really become very easy to talk to recently. It was already evening. It was time to go back to the residence for dinner. Chu Qingyin looked at the restaurant behind her. It was a pity that they booked a private room and didn't eat anything. What a waste. However, in comparison, she felt that Huang Yi's cooking was better. She happily followed Xiao Su. Because the carriage stopped under the shade of the tree, the group slowly walked back the way they came. She didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but as soon as they left the restaurant, Xiao Su naturally took her hand. With the previous adaptation, Chu Qingyin didn't feel awkward. Instead, she was already used to it. Kai, seeing that Lord treats you well, Mother is relieved. This was her mother who whispered in her ear before leaving. Chu Qingyin tilted her head and looked at him thoughtfully. Xiao Su keenly noticed that her mind was wandering. Is something the matter? Lord, thank you for specially bringing my parents out. You're so good to me. Chu Qingyin smiled at him without thinking. Xiao Su said matter-of-factly, "It's good that you know." Chu Qingyin thought that he would be polite. She didn't expect him to admit it so openly. She choked at first, then laughed. Did that mean that she had successfully found a sugar daddy? Xiao Su didn't know why she was giggling all of a sudden, but he felt that having her by his side was not a loss of pleasure. Calm and collected, the years were peaceful. Grand Emperor, Big Brother. A voice of pleasant surprise broke the silence. Chu Qingyin felt that this voice was somewhat familiar. Looking in the direction of the voice, he saw a light blue youth waving at him from the side of the carriage not far away. Xiaoran? Why was he here? Chu Qingyin subconsciously looked at the person beside her. She seemed to have sensed Xiao Su's surprised expression, but he quickly let go of her hand and strode forward. He said coldly to Xiaoran, "If this prince remembers correctly, you should be taking equestrian archery lessons right now." Facing this elder brother, Xiaoran was always respectful. Hearing this, he said guiltily, "Today, I wanted to go out for a walk. I don't want to be locked up in the palace all the time. It's too boring." Nonsense. Xiao Su's tone was still strict. Xiaoran said fawningly to him, "Eldest brother, don't do it again. Just this once. This prince will send someone to send you back," Xiao Su said firmly. Xiaoran could only agree. He was already used to his imperial brother's temper. Chu Qingyin watched this scene with relish. She didn't expect that Xiaoran would also be defeated. Gu Rong and Gui had already gone to get the carriage. Xiao saw that he couldn't get anything out of his imperial brother, so he turned to look at Chu Qingyan. He had seen her from the beginning. At this moment, he looked at her with an awkward expression and said, "Hey, are you feeling better?" She didn't expect Xiao to speak out of concern for her. However, when she recalled that the pastries were made by him, she smiled knowingly. "I've basically recovered. Thank you, fourth prince, for your concern." Xiao saw that she didn't intend to blame him and felt a little uncomfortable. He coughed lightly, then continued, "This prince also doesn't know why those pastries were poisoned. So this prince is happy for you that you escaped. As the saying goes, those who survive a great disaster are destined for good fortune. You will be a blessed person in the future." It was hard to imagine that the person who had glared at her in the past would actually speak to her so nicely. Chu Qingyan pretended to be flattered and replied, "Thank you, fourth prince, for your auspicious words." Xiao saw that she was obedient and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. His entire body relaxed, and he said as if they were close friends, "Ai, Chu Qingyan, although your looks and temper are a little lacking, this prince finds you pleasing to the eye. From now on, we will be friends. When this prince has time, this prince will go to the King of England's residence to play with you." He found her pleasing to the eye so quickly? Then what about the tit-for-tat from before? Chu Qingyan felt that the fourth prince's way of making friends was really strange. However, when she looked seriously into his eyes, she saw a trace of unnatural expectation and worry flash across his eyes. Was he afraid that she wouldn't be friends with him? Chu Qingyan suddenly felt some sympathy for these people in the imperial family who wore bright and beautiful clothes, but were actually lonely and desolate. There were no true friends, only mutually beneficial interactions. Even the important matter of marriage was used as a bargaining chip. Her enmity towards the fourth prince was also dissolved at this moment. Seeing that Chu Qingyan was in a daze, Xiao thought that she was in a difficult position. His expression couldn't help but change, and he said to her somewhat fiercely, "This prince wants to be friends with you because I think highly of you. You mustn't." "Ah, who hit my head? Eldest brother." Xiao was in so much pain that he almost stomped his feet, but when he turned his head and saw who it was, his voice immediately weakened. "Don't dilly-dally. I'll send you back to the imperial palace first." Xiao said indifferently, "Let this subject brother play for a while more. In the imperial palace, if this subject brother isn't learning to compose poems and play the zither, then it's learning to ride and shoot chess. There's no freedom at all. Imperial brother shouldn't be so strict with this subject brother like imperial mother." Xiao attention was immediately attracted by him. He wanted to pull on his sleeve and act spoiled, but he didn't dare. He could only look at him pitifully. Xiao looked at Xiao who was complaining in front of him, but still had a happy expression on his face. His eyes were gloomy. "You should feel satisfied and happy that someone is watching over you and caring for you. There's no need to say more. If you don't go back, Imperial Father will probably send out the Imperial Guards to look for you again." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao waved his hand and ordered Gu Rong and Gu Yi to bring the carriage over. Xiao face immediately became dejected. Chu Qingyan looked at this scene and couldn't help but find it funny. Although Xiao usually looked cold, he seemed to be quite caring towards this imperial brother of his. But she faintly felt that when he said those words just now, his voice seemed to be tense and a little lonely. She thought of the rumors she had heard before. Sichuan Emperor was more guarded than doting towards this eldest son of his. He was cold and indifferent, but close to him. Looking up at the straight and calm figure in front of her, she suddenly felt a trace of pity for the person in front of her. "Eldest brother, stinky girl, I'm going back." When the carriage arrived in front of him, Xiao no longer made a futile struggle. He waved his hand at the two of them. Although he was a little unhappy, he still obediently got on the carriage. At this moment, more than a dozen black shadows appeared out of thin air, holding sharp blades and cold swords. They whistled as they fell. Chapter 67. As the killing intent approached, the horses were also intelligent animals. Their hooves moved restlessly, and the horses' nostrils snorted. As they moved, the carriage became unstable. Xiao Ran clung to the shaft of the carriage. Seeing that the situation was not good, he immediately jumped down. Perhaps he was a noble of the imperial family. Seeing this scene, he did not panic. Instead, he calmly stood in place, glaring angrily at the men in black who came with ill intentions. Chu Qingyan originally thought that Xiao Ran was young and would be frightened. She did not expect that in just a moment, she would see the reliable side of this unreliable prince. However, she was really frightened. The killing and plundering that was shown on television was because she knew that it was fake, so she did not feel anything. But now that it was about to happen to her, her fingers could not help but tremble. But when she saw the tall and straight person standing in place as if nothing had happened, the fear in her heart dissipated. She was originally standing a little far from him, but she could not help but take a few steps closer. Then, she stood behind him and looked at these people with wide eyes. Xiao Su frowned. These people's footsteps were light. It could be seen that their martial arts were not weak. He did not know when these people had been hiding in the capital. Kill. The men in black saw that there were not many of them and immediately attacked. Moreover, the direction of their attack was actually Xiao Ran. Protect the fourth prince. The guards who followed Xiao Ran immediately protected him behind them. One after another, they flashed their swords and tangled with the men in black. Unfortunately, Xiao Ran had sneaked out of the palace this time, so he didn't bring many guards with him. In addition, the assassin's martial arts was very strong, so those guards couldn't resist at all. The situation quickly turned to one side. Xiao Su did not hesitate. He ordered Gu Yi to protect Chu Qingyan. Then, he flew in and joined the fight. Without Xiao Su, Chu Qingyan glanced at Gu Yi, who was standing beside her with a dark expression. She had always felt that Gu Yi was prejudiced against her. Normally, she would try her best to avoid contact with him as much as possible. However, at a time like this, she could not afford to be pretentious. Otherwise, she might lose her life. Therefore, she listened to Xiao Su's words and obediently stood beside Gu Yi. She only did her best to reduce her presence. The situation was eased with the addition of Xiao Su. Gu Rong also raised his sword and fought with the men in black. Because of the addition of Xiao Su, the invincible god of war, the imperial bodyguards' morale was boosted, and they fought even harder. Xiao Ran had also learned some martial arts in the palace. At this moment, he was holding a sword and slashing the imperial bodyguards while they were fighting with the black-clothed men. A scream sounded. Chu Qingyan's eyelids twitched. She couldn't help but open her eyes. But just as she opened her eyes, a white light lit up in her eyes. Her pupils shrank. Her body moved faster than her thoughts. Her body leaned to the right. Her right foot bent slightly. Her whole body kicked to the right. The sword just happened to pass by her left side and cut off a chunk of her hair. She used too much strength and her legs were weak. After dodging the attack, she did not stand firm and her whole body fell to the ground. She instantly raised her head to look at the man in black who had missed and was raising his sword in her direction again. She finally knew what it felt like to be caught in the crossfire. At this time, Xiao Su's back was facing her. He did not see what happened to her at all. Xiao Su was like a sickle harvesting grass. He took care of the men in black one by one. However, the other side had more people. It would take some time to kill them all. But now was not the time to think about this. She suddenly remembered that Xiao Su had arranged for Gu Yi to protect her. She looked around and saw Gu Yi's figure in the middle of the fight. Her cry for help was stuck in her throat. However, amidst the flashes and shadows of swords, she suddenly realized something. Except for Xiao Su, these people did not take her seriously at all. If it weren't for the fact that the West Xian Emperor had bestowed a marriage upon her, these fierce men that Xiao Su had brought out from the battlefield wouldn't even spare her a glance. They were usually respectful to her, but in fact, they were perfunctory. She thought that they would at least maintain their calm on the surface. But at the critical moment of life and death, she was the first one to be abandoned. Perhaps in their eyes, her life was not worth anything at all. On the contrary, her existence was a disgrace to the King of England's household. The god of war of this generation was actually betrothed to a little girl who had not yet reached marriageable age and had no foundation. She had already become the laughingstock of the capital. Sorrow came from within. The things that she had never seen clearly, or the facts that she did not want to see clearly, were now bloody cut open and spread out in front of her by this sword. All the good things during this period of time were shattered one by one. It turned out that the things that she wanted to avoid, there would always be someone forcing her to face them. Her muddling through life was already over. Chu Qingyin closed her eyes slightly, somewhat resigned to her fate. Was she going to die tragically in this street? Was she going to die so sullen and so sad? No, she did not need to lose her desire to live for these unworthy people. She still had her father and her mother, she and herself. In an instant, she opened her eyes, and a determined look burst forth. It was so bright that the black-clothed man's eyes flashed slightly, and his movements also hesitated. Now is the time. Chu Qingyin put her hands on the ground, lowered her head, and bumped into the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man did not expect that Chu Qingyin would be so bold. He was caught off guard and retreated a few steps. Taking advantage of the fact that the black-clothed man did not react, Chu Qingyin ran towards the carriage closest to her. She grabbed the shaft of the carriage and immediately climbed up. She wriggled her way to the coachman's seat, picked up the whip, and lashed at the horse, wanting to drive the carriage away from this troublesome place. When the black-clothed man saw Chu Qingyin climb up the carriage, he thought of the shame of his failure just now and revealed a cruel smile. When Chu Qingyin was in a flurry to drive the disobedient carriage, he slowly approached. When he saw that Chu Qingyin revealed a frightened expression, he brandished his sword and chopped at the horse. The horse neighed in pain, and its two front hooves jumped high. The carriage suddenly tilted back. Chu Qingyin did not expect this, and her whole body was thrown into the carriage, fiercely hitting the wall of the carriage. The horse was in so much pain that it spread its four hooves and charged forward in a mess. Chu Qingyin was dizzy from the collision. At this time, seeing that the situation was not good, she wanted to get up and pull the reins. Unfortunately, the horse was injured, and the pain made it forget everything, so it did not care about anything else. Chu Qingyin wanted to get up, but she was powerless. Her whole body was knocked around in the carriage. The horse had already gone crazy, and in addition, it was a warhorse brought back from the battlefield, so its lethality was very strong. Soon, it overturned a lot of stalls. Chu Qingyin gritted her teeth in the carriage. That black-clothed man must want her to die in the carriage, because at this speed, the carriage would soon be destroyed and people would die. Chapter 68. In the middle of the busy city, a crazy carriage suddenly appeared. The common people all dodged, and screams rose one after another. Soon, Chu Qingyin vaguely felt those screams gradually fade away, leaving only the tragic neighing of the horse. Chu Qingyin opened her eyes. Coincidentally, the carriage's curtain was lifted up by the horse's speed. She looked in confusion, but in an instant, her eyes widened with fear. She couldn't be blamed for being afraid, because there was no road in front of the carriage. It was the capital's city wall. But the horse did not seem to feel anything, and continued to charge forward without slowing down. Was she going to lose her life here? Chu Qingyin's heart was filled with despair. She really wanted to see her father and mother one more time. She closed her eyes hopelessly. Xiao couldn't find her. Would he come looking for her? Would there be a miracle? The corners of her mouth curved into a bitter smile. In this kind of critical moment, the first person she thought of was actually him. The sound of the horse's hooves, the dust danced in the air. She could faintly hear the pagoda bell and the sound of the wooden fish. Chu Qingyin didn't care, but she clearly felt that the bumpy carriage seemed to have a cushion, and the fierce neighing of the horse seemed to have weakened. The result of this was that the pagoda bell and the sound of the wooden fish, accompanied by the clear sound of the incantation, seemed to be circling around her ears like a sudden rain on the hot and restless earth. Chu Qingyin was surprised to feel the carriage gradually slow down, and in the blink of an eye, it slowly came to a stop. Chu Qingyin didn't think much and immediately opened the carriage's curtain, but when she saw her situation, she was stunned. The city wall was just 3 steps away from the horse. It was a sturdy wall made of grayish-white rocks. Chu Qingyin's face turned slightly pale. She did not dare to stay any longer. She dragged her body and quickly rolled down, afraid that the horse would go crazy again. One step was unsteady, and she fell to the ground, raising the dust on the ground. She choked on the dust, and her whole person was in a sorry state. But in a life-and-death situation, who would care about this image? Just as Chu Qingyin was about to get up, she heard the tower bell ring again. But this time, it was close at hand. "Benefactress, are you all right?" The clear voice entered her ears like the wind and rain. It was soft but not charming, moisturizing and soundless. She looked in the direction of the sound and saw a white-robed man standing in front of the horse. From her angle, the reddish-brown horse's mane blocked the man's face. She could only see a hand with a holy halo resting on the horse's head, as if he was comforting the restless horse. What was surprising was that the horse really became quiet under his caressing. When the horse stopped neighing, the white-clothed man moved his feet slightly and walked around the horse to walk over. She looked at the person who had just arrived. It was as if a sea of silver moonlight had spread out in front of her eyes, and he was stepping on a Buddhist lotus. Flowers bloomed with every step he took, and there was a faint glow with every step he took. His pure and holy gaze carried a faint smile that bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. There was a red cinnabar on his forehead. If it was another man with such a red cinnabar, he would be charming even if he wasn't bewitching. But on him, it only gave people a kind of holiness that could only be seen from afar and not touched. Chu Qingyin looked on helplessly as the Buddhist youth walked in front of her without a speck of dust. He gently opened his lips and asked with concern, "Benefactress, can you get up?" Chu Qingyin woke up with a start. She was embarrassed that she had been fascinated by a monk. She comforted herself. Everyone loved beauty. Even if he was a Buddhist disciple, it didn't stop people from admiring him. "I can." Chu Qingyin didn't care about the dust on her body. She stood up shakily. She was still in a state of shock from the shock she had just received, but she could still stand up with difficulty. When she stood up, Chu Qingyin discovered that she had only just reached his chest. She was a bit depressed. She discovered that after coming to ancient times, the people she met were all much taller than her. Whether it was Xiao, her father, or that Xiao Ran who was only 2 years older than her, if she wanted to talk to them, she had to raise her head high. It seemed that it was imperative for her to grow taller. But when she raised her head to look at the person in front of her, the person's facial features were clear. His eyes were smiling, but he was looking at her without any sadness or joy. He was only a 17 or 18-year-old young monk, but he gave people a feeling that he had seen through the mundane world and understood everything clearly. "Great master, were you the one who saved me just now?" She guessed that the horse had suddenly stopped because other than the person in front of her, there was no one else who had helped. Her voice was filled with gratitude as she looked at him with bright eyes. "Female benefactor doesn't need to worry. This poor monk just happened to be passing by and did it in passing." The white-robed monk put his hands together in front of his chest and slightly bent his body to reply with a faint smile. It wasn't modesty or indifference. It was a tone that said this poor monk was doing his job. Perhaps it was this peaceful tone that made people feel at ease for no reason. In the modern world, the area Chu Qingyin lived in believed in Buddhism. Every festival, there would be endless incense. However, she had personally seen Buddhist disciples wearing monk robes going in and out of the brothel, so she had no feelings towards Buddhist disciples. She felt that they were just commoners draped in Buddhist robes. But now that she saw this person, Chu Qingyin finally understood what a Buddhist monk was. Reverence surged in her heart, and her expression became solemn. "No matter what, I still have to thank Great Master for saving me." The other party smiled faintly and then nodded at her. "Female benefactor is too polite. This poor monk has to treat this injured horse first. Please forgive this poor monk for not being able to chat with female benefactor." Chu Qingyin hurriedly waved her hand. "Great master, please go ahead. There's no need to worry about me." Ba. The clear voice sounded again. The white-robed monk turned to face the horse with its head bowed. He reached into his sleeve and took out a white jade bottle. He opened the cork and sprinkled the medicinal powder inside on the horse's hideous knife wound. The horse raised its front hooves in pain. However, under the gentle comforting of the white-robed monk, it gradually calmed down. Only then did Chu Qingyan notice that there was a string of Buddhist prayer beads hanging from his wrist. It was simple and colorless, but it slid around his wrist with his movements. There was an indescribable charm to it. Perhaps it was a string of ordinary wooden beads, but because it was worn by him, it gave people an inexplicable feeling of weight. It wasn't good to keep staring at him. Chu Qingyan shifted her gaze to the horse. However, when she saw the wound on its head, a trace of self-blame floated in her heart. If it weren't for her, the horse wouldn't have been injured. Perhaps sensing Chu Qingyan's downcast mood, the white-robed monk stroked the horse's mane and said, "Everything has its cause and effect. Benefactress, you don't have to blame yourself. If you blame yourself because of other people's mistakes, your heart won't be at peace." Chu Qingyan naturally knew that he was comforting her. She gratefully said, "Thank you, great master." Time seemed to slow down because of his actions. Chu Qingyan was a little curious. Why did such a spiritual person enter Buddhism? Perhaps because he was often noticed by others, the white-robed monk didn't care. He carefully applied the medicinal powder on the horse. After a long while, he withdrew his hand, plugged the bottle, and put it back into his sleeve. The horse raised its head and rubbed against his hand. Chu Qingyan's sharp eyes discovered that this horse seemed to be spiritual. Its eyes were filled with tears, and its gaze was filled with gratitude. Chu Qingyan looked at the white-robed monk in front of her in astonishment. It seemed that he was used to doing this. The faint smile hanging on the corner of his mouth was as noble as a Buddhist lotus that disappeared in an instant. At this moment, the sound of horse hooves came whistling. Chu Qingyan heard the sound and turned her head. She saw a black-robed monk leading the way in their direction. Chapter 69. Amidst the billowing dust, that person brandished his whip as he approached. His expression couldn't be seen through the silver mask, but she could vaguely see a trace of worry in his dark eyes. It was as if she had walked in the desert for too long and suddenly saw an oasis. It was as if she was drifting in the vast ocean and suddenly saw a lone boat. At this moment, her heart overflowed with lingering fear. But she seemed to have thought of something. She pursed her lips and turned her head away, unwilling to look at him. The person on the horse saw that she was standing there safe and sound, and his heart finally relaxed. He reined in the horse and flew down. In one breath, he quickly walked in front of her. His eyes had already seen the wound on the horse and the nearby city wall. With a glance, he had already seen the urgency of the situation. He lowered his head to look at the person in front of him and couldn't help but raise his hand to gently stroke her head. "Are you hurt?" Chu Qingyan stubbornly refused to respond. She lowered her head and played with her fingers. Xiao didn't know what she was being awkward about. He usually didn't have much patience with her. Now that he saw her throwing a tantrum for no reason, he frowned slightly and was about to scold her. But his sharp eyes saw two bean-sized teardrops roll down the back of her entwined hands. They instantly bloomed and splashed on the ground, burying into the dark dust. Xiao was slightly startled. It wasn't that he hadn't seen people cry before. On the battlefield, men shed tears of life and death. After the smoke of battle, the old, weak, women, and children would scream, sob in despair, or sob in fear. But this was the first time he saw someone cry. He was slightly flustered. It wasn't that he hadn't seen her cry before, but perhaps it was the first time he saw such a strong person cry as if the whole world had abandoned her. Grief filled her heart. Chu Qingyan raised her hand to wipe the tears on her face. But the more she wiped, the more tears fell. In the end, she gave up. Xiao didn't know where to start comforting her. The previous aides had never written down how to deal with such a situation. In the end, out of instinct, his long hand wrapped around her and pulled her into his embrace. Like how women and children comforted children, he gently patted her back. Unexpectedly, this hug seemed to have allowed Chu Qingyin to find a way to vent her emotions. Her tears were like an overflowing river, drenching most of his clothes. He had thought that she would calm down because of his comfort, but unexpectedly, it was the opposite. He had always been in control of the situation and had great power in his hands. This was the first time he was facing such a petite child, and he was actually at a loss. "Benefactress, you might be frightened. Go back and drink some medicine to calm your nerves." The white-robed monk put his palms together and suggested. Only then did Xiao Su notice the person in front of him. Although he was hugging Chu Qingyin, he didn't feel awkward. He looked at him coldly. "Master Su Jian, how have you been? Has His Royal Highness been well recently?" Su Jian was not displeased that the other party had ignored him. His expression was still ethereal. "Thanks to Grandmaster's blessings, this prince has not fallen ill or suffered any disasters, and my life has been quite smooth. On the other hand, I haven't seen Grandmaster for a long time. It seems like your skills have improved." "Congratulations, Grandmaster," Xiao Su replied calmly. "Skills are just for recuperation. There's nothing to be happy about." Su Jian's lips curved into a smile, but it was like a dream. It was impossible to tell whether he was happy or sad. His gaze fell on the person in Xiao Su's arms, and he slowly said, "This benefactress must be the future consort of the King of England. This humble monk congratulates your highness, but this humble monk has something to say to your highness." "Grandmaster, there's no harm in saying it." Xiao Su's thoughts were all on the person in his arms. When he heard Su Jian speak, he raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at him. "Your highness, love and separation, resentment and hatred, leaving one's hands and returning to the West, there is no such thing. It's just empty flowers in your eyes. This humble monk advises your highness not to be too stubborn. This humble monk has said all, Amitabha." Su Jian closed his eyes and recited. Su Jian was a famous monk who had achieved the Tao. Although he was young, he was highly respected by the royal families and common people of various countries. To be able to receive a word of his mantra was a blessing that could be said to have cultivated 3 times. However, Xiao Su didn't believe in gods or Buddhas, but he didn't reject them either. After hearing Su Jian's words, he didn't take it to heart and thanked him. When Chu Qingyin, who was buried in Xiao Su's arms, heard Su Jian's words, she was surprised. Could it be that Su Jian was a fraud? Looking at his Buddhist nature, could it be that he was like those people in the modern world who wore monk's robes but didn't do monk's work? After thinking about it, Chu Qingyin stopped crying. Sensing her change, Xiao Su pulled her out of his arms and lowered his head to say to her, "Let's go back." Seeing Xiao Su lead the horse over, Chu Qingyin knew that no matter what, they had to return to the prince's estate. She lowered her head and walked forward, but the moment she touched the ground, a piercing pain came from her ankle. She cried out in alarm, and her body fell to the ground. The person standing closest to her reached out to support her. Chu Qingyin was instantly enveloped by the cool scent of sandalwood. She subconsciously raised her head and happened to hear his clear voice. "Be careful." Xiao Su also heard the commotion and strode over. Seeing her biting her lip in pain, he immediately squatted down and examined her right ankle, only to find that it was very swollen. Chu Qingyin looked down and was startled. She didn't expect it to be so serious. She must have twisted it when she was dodging the black-clothed men. She had only felt a bit of discomfort earlier, perhaps because she was running for her life and didn't pay attention. Now that the danger was over and she could relax, the pain was so obvious. Xiao Su felt that this injury couldn't be left untreated for too long, so he didn't think too much about it. He took Chu Qingyin from Su Jian's hands and bent down slightly. His hands reached under her ribs and calves, easily lifting her up. "Grandmaster, thank you for saving this prince's people today. I'll thank you another day." Xiao Su nodded slightly to Su Jian, then flew onto the horse. With one hand protecting her in front of him and the other holding the reins, he led the people who had followed them into the city. Su Jian watched as the two left with an indifferent expression. Just now, He had sensed an aura on Chu Qingyin that didn't belong here. That was a lonely soul in a foreign land that would disappear from this world one day. That was why he had calculated that Xiao Su and her were not fated to be together and were destined to be alone. That was why he had reminded Xiao Su to weigh the pros and cons and not be too conflicted. That was all he had to say. As for what happened, it would depend on fate. He turned around and was about to leave when he heard something breaking. In an instant, he saw the wooden beads on his wrist scatter in all directions. Not long after, they rolled all over the ground. He frowned as he watched the wooden beads roll. Perhaps it was because he had touched Chu Qingyin's hairpin when he was helping her up. This was something his master had given him 3 years ago when he had left the temple to travel the world. He had said that it had something to do with his calamity. When the wooden beads finally stopped moving, his brow twitched slightly. The 18 wooden beads scattered in a seemingly disorderly manner, but what they formed was a rarely seen hexagram. He couldn't help but pinch his fingers together to calculate. From where Chu Qingyin was standing, she just happened to see the figure behind her getting farther and farther away. His white robes were not pure white. They were embroidered with fine black Sanskrit characters that fluttered in the wind. He seemed otherworldly, as if he wanted to ride the wind and return to the world. When she shifted her gaze upwards, Chu Qingyin was slightly puzzled. Why did that pair of calm and holy eyes suddenly have a look of surprise on them? Chapter 70. Just now, the pain had occupied all her senses, so when Xiao Su picked her up, she was still in a daze. In the blink of an eye, she was already sitting on the horse's back. The cool evening breeze blew, drying the tears on her face. Leaning against his chest, separated by his clothes, she could feel the warmth, which comforted her frightened little heart. But now, she didn't want to face him. Xiao Su frowned as he sensed her emotions. On the battlefield, he could see through the opponent's schemes with a single glance, but he couldn't understand the thoughts of a child. After all, the world of a child wasn't easy to understand. At this time, several horses galloped over, attracting Chu Qingyin's attention. At the front, a young man in embroidered clothes was leading the way, his white face full of anxiety. Only when he saw the two figures leaning against each other on the horse's back did he let out a sigh of relief. Eldest brother, is Qingyin all right? When the two groups of people approached, the young man in embroidered clothes looked at Chu Qingyin, whose head was turned to the side. He couldn't see her expression clearly, so he couldn't help but turn his head to ask his imperial brother. She's fine. Xiao Su looked down at the person in his arms and replied indifferently. That's good. The young man in embroidered clothes rubbed his head, then turned his head to Chu Qingyin, who had the back of her head facing him. He turned the horse's head to the other side and said to her with a grin, "Stinky girl. One who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune in the future." Chu Qingyin had already seen Xiao Ran, but when she saw him, she thought of today's assassination and couldn't help but feel angry. If it weren't for him, would she have suffered such an undeserved disaster? When she heard his words, Chu Qingyin was filled with anger, and without thinking, she retorted, "Bound to have good fortune in the future. I'd rather not have such a disaster." Xiao Ran didn't expect that this lass would actually dare to talk back to him. Before he could react, the attendant behind him had already stepped forward and reprimanded her. "How dare you? This is the dignified fourth prince. How can a wild lass like you dare to offend him?" When Chu Qingyin heard the words "wild girl," she was about to retort when she heard a soft scolding from above her head. "Nonsense." Chu Qingyin immediately gave up. She puffed up her cheeks and bit her lip angrily, not saying a word. Not resisting didn't mean submission or fear. Instead, it meant that a wise man submits to circumstances. Xiao Su saw that she was fuming and seemed much more lively than before. Only then did he turn his gaze to the follower with his chin raised high. That follower was originally arrogant and despotic, but when he met His Royal Highness's icy gaze, he immediately lowered his head and retreated in terror. Although Xiao Ran was a little annoyed by Chu Qingyin's rebuttal, his life had been smooth sailing for so many years. Other than in front of her, he had always kicked an iron plate and wanted to vent his anger on her. But when he saw her watery eyes and a layer of grievance and sadness, the scolding that was about to come out of his mouth was immediately choked in his throat. He couldn't help but think that whether it was the poisoning incident last time or the failed assassination attempt this time, if it wasn't related to him in countless ways, then it was directed at him. And Chu Qingyin was always innocently implicated and almost lost her life. Both times, she was on the brink of death. He couldn't help but blame himself for causing her to be in such a state. But since he was young, he had been instilled with the idea that the people around him were born to protect him. When it came to these people's lives, he rarely cared about them. But when he saw the grievance on Chu Qingyin's face, he suddenly became absent-minded. And just as Xiao Ran was in a daze, Xiao Su looked at the sky, and then looked at Chu Qingyin's increasingly swollen ankle. If he delayed any longer, it would become even more serious. Thus, he said to the guard behind Xiao Ran, "It's getting late. Send the fourth prince back to the palace." After giving his instructions, Xiao Su finally nodded to Xiao Ran, then raised his whip and led his entourage away. This assassination attempt was premeditated, and there might be other assassins hiding in the dark. So, in order to protect the fourth prince's safety, and also to save their own heads, the guards persuaded Xiao Ran to return to the palace. At this time, Xiao Ran was still in a daze, staring at that pair of lively eyes filled with indescribable emotions. In the midst of the rippling water, there were no words. Suddenly, the poem that the Grand Tutor had taught him yesterday flashed in his mind. He finally understood what the Grand Tutor meant when he said that it could only be understood, but not explained. Listening to the guard's persuasion, he watched from afar as that pear-colored figure was enveloped in black ink, moving further and further away. Then, once, twice, countless times, he watched this scene from afar, his heart filled with a sense of loss, but each time, it was more profound and painful than the last. "Are you happy now?" On horseback, the cold-faced lord suddenly opened his mouth. Chu Qingyin had been immersed in her own world of sadness and thought that she was hearing things. She couldn't help but raise her head, but just happened to meet his eyes that were as dark as the night sky. At first, she was startled, but then she angrily turned her head away. "None of your business." Chu Qingyin gritted her teeth. "Are you still angry?" Although he used a questioning sentence, his tone was firm. "Hee, I'm just a wild girl. What qualifications do I have to be angry with you noble princes who were born with a silver spoon in your mouth?" When she thought of that shining blade that had almost fallen on her neck, and that rampaging carriage, and the wall that was close at hand, her heart trembled slightly, and she couldn't help but look at him coldly. Xiao Su coldly raised his eyebrows, wondering if he had been too indulgent with her recently, causing her to dare to blow her beard and glare at him. But looking at the person who was trembling in his arms, most of the anger in his heart dissipated. Xiao Ran can't have anything happen to him. Chu Qingyin gave a cold snort. He was telling her that Xiao Ran's life was more important than hers. Was she, a commoner, not worth anything? Feeling her anger rising, Xiao Su's lips curled into a helpless smile. He raised his hand and placed it on her head, gently stroking it. "This king will compensate you." Chu Qingyin's hands grabbed the front of his clothes. Hearing his words, her heart finally calmed down. This was more like it. Perhaps it was because she was too close to the situation. Chu Qingyin did not realize that at this time, she was not complaining about Xiao Su ignoring her. This was not his fault, because he had already arranged for Gu Yi to protect her. Actually, what she cared about was that Xiao Su cared about Xiao Ran more than her. She did not realize that she had already unknowingly taken Xiao Su into her territory. Perhaps she had 1,000 faces in front of outsiders, but she would only reveal her true feelings in front of the people she cared about, such as her parents, her best friends, and Xiao Su, who was unknowingly taken in. Yellow smoke billowed, leaving behind a trail of dust. High up, a figure leaned against a stone pillar behind him, his posture casual and at ease. His appearance was picturesque. When he smiled, he was as enchanting as a rose. When he did not smile, he was as mysterious as the deep sea. Wearing a purple robe, he was charming and seductive. If one did not see his Adam's apple, they would definitely mistake him for a woman. If Chu Qingyin was present, she would probably cry out in surprise. What a peerlessly beautiful man with the appearance of a woman. At this time, a person behind the mysterious man knelt down to report. "Greetings, young palace master. Why are you here?" The voice carried a hint of a smile, but for some reason, it made people feel cold. Someone offered 10,000 taels to assassinate the fourth prince of Sichuan. The black-clothed man was still injured, but he endured the pain and replied, "It seems that this trip to Sichuan will be a bit interesting." The mysterious man looked at the dusty horse, revealing a smile that was not a smile. Chapter 71. They were silent all the way back to the King of England's residence. It was still Xiao Su who carried her off the horse and carried her all the way back to Yuxian Garden. Along the way, they received a lot of attention. Chu Qingyin would not forget the surprise on his face when White Tiger greeted them at the door. Although he concealed it very well, it still did not escape her eyes. The servants, big and small, who were holding brooms, kettles, and plates, all forgot what they were doing when they saw this scene. They were directly stunned on the spot. Their lord was actually carrying a woman? Carrying a woman? Although this girl was only around 10 years old, she was a girl of real worth. Didn't they say that the lord was not close to women, did not like people to get close to him, and did not want people to touch him? How did the scene suddenly change to this? Could it be that in just a few days, this little princess consort had already deeply won the lord's heart? Therefore, the looks that were cast at Chu Qingyin suddenly became strange. There was envy, reverence, worship, jealousy, as well as flattery and fawning. Chu Qingyin felt the looks coming from all directions. She couldn't help but hug Xiao Su's neck tightly, and her whole body shrank into his arms. It seemed that in a day, the whole situation had changed. But this had nothing to do with her. She just wanted to live a stable life. But did God really let her transmigrate to live a peaceful life? Otherwise, when they entered the main courtyard, Hong Yi and the others had received the news and were already standing at the door to welcome them. Although they were mentally prepared, when they saw the two people come in, they were still slightly stunned. Under the command of their lord, they all performed their duties and busied themselves. "Send Ethereal over." Before entering the room, Xiao Su ordered Hong Yi. Hong Yi looked at Chu Qingyin and quickly responded. When Ethereal came in, Chu Qingyin was already a little sleepy. What happened in there? She fell unconscious in a daze. After an unknown amount of time, she felt a sharp pain in her ankle and immediately woke up with a cry. As soon as she opened her eyes, she was met with a pair of unfathomable eyes. She was stunned for a moment, and then the pain in her ankle came in waves. Only then did she subconsciously look down and see that her injured foot had fallen into his left hand. Chu Qingyin was shocked and immediately wanted to withdraw, but just as she moved, she was tightly held by his hand. "Don't move." Xiao Su frowned. Chu Qingyin immediately became obedient, and then saw that he was holding a medicine bottle in his right hand. Only then did she know that he was applying medicine for her, and immediately said, "I'll do it myself. If you don't want your foot injury to worsen, then behave yourself." Just now, Ethereal said that her foot would not recover for at least half a month, so Xiao Su was in a bad mood when he heard that. Now that he saw that she did not have any self-awareness, his tone was not very good. At least, that was what Chu Qingyin heard. When Chu Qingyin was yelled at by him, all the grievances she had suffered before today rushed up. She had just left this bed this morning, and now she was sent back here. Unwillingness and sadness filled her heart. She gritted her teeth and said angrily, "If it worsen, then so be it. This crippled leg is my own fault. There's no need for your highness to personally serve me." As she said this, she tried to pull her foot back. Unfortunately, the force that was restraining her calf was like a steel ring, preventing her from moving at all. She raised her head and looked at the person in front of her angrily. What exactly do you want? Shouldn't this prince be the one asking you this question? His eyes darkened, and his tone was like ice. Chu Qingyan angrily grabbed the blanket. Since he wanted to apply medicine for her, then let him do it. She would just ignore him. The person in front of him finally stopped. Xiao Su continued to lower his head and apply the medicine that he had not finished before. Chu Qingyan thought that he would use this chance to retaliate, so she was prepared to endure the pain. But other than a slight pain coming from her ankle and the cold medicine, there was only a slight numbness. She opened her closed eyes and looked at her ankle in surprise. She then followed his movements and looked up. She felt that he was focused on something very important. She suddenly felt a bit annoyed. It seemed like she was measuring the heart of a gentleman with her own yardstick. But looking at how familiar he was with applying medicine, it was not like when he was feeding her food. It seemed like he often did this kind of thing. She tilted her head and happened to meet his eyes. Only then did she realize that she had accidentally asked what was on her mind. On the battlefield, it is common to get injured, he lightly said, like he was talking about the weather. His meaning was that he often got injured, so he was used to applying medicine for himself. Seeing him skillfully wrap the white gauze around her, her heart couldn't help feeling a bit of pain. She unconsciously blurted out, "Does it hurt a lot?" When Xiao Su heard this, his fingers that were wrapping the white gauze around her paused. His eyes calmly looked at her, making her unable to understand, so he continued what he was doing. Chu Qingyan did not know that her words were filled with pity and concern, which made Xiao Su's frozen heart slightly move. "It's fine as long as you get used to it." His voice was calm, but it made Chu Qingyan fall silent for no reason. After getting injured so many times, did he become numb to it and not care anymore? But at this time, Hualing quickly walked in. Seeing his master treating Chu Qingyan's wounds, he was first surprised, but then he calmed down and said, "Master, there is a message from the palace, calling for you to immediately enter the palace." What did he say? After Xiao Su was done, he moved her feet under the quilt and asked unhurriedly. Hualing looked at Chu Qingyan lying on the bed. He lowered his head and said, "It's about the fourth prince being attacked by an assassin." Xiao Su's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He lightly said, "This king understands." After saying this, he stood up. When he was about to leave, he thought of something and bent down. Facing the confused Chu Qingyan, he patted her head and said, "You've had enough? Enough is enough. Be good and listen to me." Not only Chu Qingyan, even Hualing was in disbelief. It wasn't until Xiao Su left in large strides that Chu Qingyan realized something. Yeah, why did that action seem like he was patting his pet's head? She wasn't a dog. After thinking about it, Chu Qingyan felt a bit depressed, but she also felt a bit of joy in her heart. At this time, Huang Yi came in with a bowl of medicinal soup. She said that Yahweh had ordered it to be made for her to drink, and that the medicine was to suppress shock. Chu Qingyan also knew that good medicine was bitter, so she pinched her nose and drank it. Huang Yi said with a smile, "Ninth Miss Chu is becoming braver and braver." When Chu Qingyan heard this, she couldn't help but think of how she always used the opportunity to refuse medicine before and rubbed her nose in embarrassment. Huang Yi took back the bowl, but her expression was a bit worried. "I wonder if Yahweh will be punished by His Majesty for entering the palace this time?" When Chu Qingyan heard this, she immediately asked, "What do you mean?" Huang Yi felt that she had spilled the beans and didn't want to say too much, but seeing how Yahweh treated Chu Qingyan so well, she couldn't help but include her in her camp. She sighed. His Majesty has always doted on the fourth prince. One year, when the fourth prince was only 3 years old, he secretly climbed up a big tree in the imperial garden and fell down. Coincidentally, Yahweh happened to pass by and save the fourth prince, but because the fourth prince was frightened and couldn't stop crying, His Majesty punished Yahweh by sending him back to his palace to reflect on his mistakes. Although the fourth prince was assassinated and came out unscathed, His Majesty, it wasn't hard for Chu Qingyan to guess Huang Yi's unfinished words. As long as Xiao Su was present, whether Xiao Ran was injured or not, he couldn't escape being scolded. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt that the medicine was so bitter. Chapter 72. Chu Qingyin was lying on the bed, while Xining was fanning herself at the side. Mistress, when I heard that you were injured by an assassin outside, this servant's heart almost jumped out of my chest, Xining said as she fanned herself, her voice still filled with lingering fear. Chu Qingyin smiled and raised a finger to poke her forehead. She chuckled and said, "Jump out and let me see." Xining stomped her feet helplessly. "Mistress." Chu Qingyin withdrew her hand and stopped teasing her. Her thoughts turned to what Huangyi had said, and she couldn't help but ask, "Is His Majesty always very strict with Lord?" "This," Xining instantly stammered. Today, in front of Huang Yi, because of her age, she didn't dare to ask too much. Now that she saw that Xining seemed to know some things, Chu Qingyin immediately looked at her. "Tell me everything you know." Xining looked at her mistress and thought for a moment. She felt that she should tell her mistress everything she knew, so she quickly threw the steward's admonishment to the back of her mind. "Mistress, it shouldn't be called strict. It should be—" Xining thought for a long time and finally thought of a suitable word. "Cold." Cold? Did it mean that she didn't care about anything? Chu Qingyin frowned. Xining continued, as if she was fighting for justice for Xiao. "I heard the elders in the Fu say that Lord is not loved by his father and mother. His Majesty originally still had some care for Lord, but ever since the birth of the fourth prince, he doted on the fourth prince very much. Later, after Lord's face was disfigured in the palace fire, His Majesty became even colder to Lord. As for the Empress, she only cared about Lord's studies and didn't care about anything else." In Xining's long-winded words, although there might be some elements of rumors, since even the little girl knew about it, it proved that the truth was not far from the truth. Chu Qingyin looked at the bed curtains. The white gauze entered her eyes and made her dazed. It seemed that the big ice cube was having a harder time than her because she still had parents who loved her dearly. Should he treat Big Ice Cube better in the future? This was the last thought that flashed through her mind before she fell asleep. When Xiao returned from the palace, Chu Qingyin was already asleep. After listening to Xining's report, he should have returned to his room to rest, but for some reason, he turned around and walked towards her room. He was a little absent-minded. His mind was replaying what his father had said to him today. His expression was indifferent, like the calm of the deep sea. When he stepped into her room, he unconsciously lightened his footsteps. When he neared her bed, he stopped. He didn't know why, but when he was by her side, he could find a trace of ease and freedom. Suddenly, he found that there was something wrong with that peaceful sleeping face. There were many beads of sweat on her forehead, and her hands were tightly gripping the blanket. Her lips were white from biting her teeth, and she was moaning from time to time. He immediately bent down and heard her talking to herself. "Go away, go away." Xiao suddenly understood. Today's events had affected her. Now that she was having nightmares, seeing her like this, his heart filled with a faint trace of pity. Just as he was about to raise his hand to gently stroke her head to calm her down, he heard her suddenly cry out, "Don't." His hand froze in midair. His eyes met with a pair of eyes that suddenly widened. He saw the confusion and fear in her eyes, and his heart couldn't help but frown. Chu Qingyin had originally dreamed of a large knife slashing towards her. After screaming in fear, she suddenly woke up. Her heart was still filled with fear as she met a pair of gentle eyes. Her heart was filled with sadness, and she didn't care about anything else. She opened her arms and hugged that person. Big Ice Cube. When the small body threw itself at him, Xiao instinctively wanted to dodge, but he didn't know why he was frozen in place. He could only watch as she squeezed into his arms and hugged him tightly. "I'm so scared." Chu Qingyin hugged that warm body tightly and said in an aggrieved voice, Nightmares, loneliness, and fear were the easiest to break a person's psychological defenses. Just like Chu Qingyin right now, if it was a normal day, she would never dare to do such a bold thing. However, only unconscious actions could be done according to one's heart. "It's okay. It's all in the past." Xiao's hands were stiff. In the end, he lowered his head and put his hand on her back, clumsily comforting her. The faint scent of ink lingered in her nose. It had the effect of calming people's hearts. Very quickly, Chu Qingyin calmed down. She felt Xiao Su gently pat her back from time to time. His strength was already much better controlled than before. She was a bit embarrassed to act like a spoiled child at her age. However, when she thought of her current age, it was natural. Since everyone treated her as a child, why didn't she properly exercise this right? However, she still remembered what she had been worried about before going to bed. She asked in a small voice, "I heard that His Majesty is very fierce. Did he blame you for entering the palace this time?" Xiao Su lowered his brows. "Where did you hear this from?" Chu Qingyin choked. Then, without a care, she said, "You don't need to know where I heard it from. Hurry up and answer my question." Xiao Su laughed soundlessly. This girl was quite bold tonight. Because Chu Qingyin was buried in his arms, she naturally couldn't see the flash in the dark night. However, when Xiao Su heard her question, he recalled what had happened in the palace today. In the imperial study, the cold and harsh words, as well as the reproachful gaze, were like 1,000 years of cold air that pressed into his heart. Imperial Father told me to find the culprit within 3 days and punish them severely. He avoided the important and talked about the trivial. When Chu Qingyin heard this, she knew that he was purposely avoiding her question. She blinked and continued to ask, "Did he say what to do if the culprit couldn't be found, and what would happen if he couldn't be found?" If he could be found, it would be his duty. If he couldn't be found, it would be a dereliction of duty. His tone was very calm, as if his mood wasn't affected by the harsh reproach of the person in the imperial study. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but mutter, "This has nothing to do with you. Who knew that the fourth prince would suddenly appear? This is simply an undeserved disaster, all right?" After muttering, Chu Qingyin lifted her head from his arms. Her hands grabbed his collar, and she said seriously and sincerely, "It's fine, Your Highness. His Majesty doesn't know how good you are. It's fine as long as I know." The coldness in the depths of his heart had already been dispelled by her gentle voice, and it was replaced by a faint warmth. Xiao Su stared at her in a daze for a while, then raised his hand to scratch her nose. He couldn't help but laugh. "What's the use of you knowing? I'll be good to you," Chu Qingyin said solemnly. "Remember what you said." Xiao Su didn't care at first, but in the end, his expression became slightly serious, and his tone also became serious. Chu Qingyin was stunned by his sudden serious expression, but then she nodded firmly. A gentleman's word is as good as a whip. No one knew that the alliance had been set, and from this moment on, the people involved didn't know that the threads of fate had already entangled the two of them. The two of them hugged each other and quietly enjoyed the tranquility of the night. "This prince will arrange another maidservant for you," Xiao Su suddenly said. Chu Qingyin thought that Xining was indeed quite young, so there were some things that needed an older maidservant to make the decision, so she nodded without any doubt. However, if she knew who the maidservant that was going to be arranged for her was, she probably wouldn't be so calm right now. "All right, it's time to settle accounts." Chu Qingyin was stunned by his sudden voice. What accounts? Tell this prince honestly, where did the words big ice cube come from? HM? Was this settling accounts at an opportune time? She thought that he didn't notice her careless call just now, but she didn't know that this fox was hiding it very well. Under the threat of the person above, Chu Qingyin lowered her head without any backbone. "Ahem, can't you be a bit more magnanimous? Really? Stingy?" Chapter 73. When the sunlight shone into the room, strands of light fell on Chu Qingyin's white face. She was disturbed by the gradually warming sunlight and slowly opened her eyes. She didn't know how she fell asleep in Xiao Su's arms last night, but she felt that the embrace was very warm and had the smell of a father. Xining heard the movement inside and walked in with a smile, holding a basin in her hand. "Master, you're up?" Chu Qingyin stretched lazily, trying her best not to touch her injured leg as she slowly sat up. "It's already so late and you didn't wake me up? The Lord said to let you sleep until you wake up naturally. How could this servant dare to disturb your sweet dreams?" Xining had been following Chu Qingyan for a long time recently, so she was no longer as timid as before. Not only did she have the lively innocence of her age, but she also learned Chu Qingyan's black-bellied personality. Chu Qingyan shook her head. As the saying goes, it takes 3 years to learn well and 3 days to learn bad. It seemed that she had the potential to teach others. At least she had successfully changed Xining's personality. After washing up, Chu Qingyan raised her head and saw Hong Yi walking in with a faint smile. Hong Yi gave people the feeling that she was gentle and virtuous, but she did things in an orderly manner. Chu Qingyan felt that if she wasn't in charge of the inner courtyard, it would have been a mess. Chu Qingyan was about to smile at her, but she saw a servant girl in purple following behind her. She was petite and had a face like a cherry, about 14 or 15 years old. Chu Qingyan had never seen her before. Hong Yi walked in front of her and slightly bowed. Hong Yi greets ninth young Miss Chu. This is the servant girl that the Lord asked this servant to arrange for you. Z. After saying this, she used her eyes to signal the person behind her to greet Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan only then remembered that Xiao Su did say that he would arrange a servant girl for her last night. She didn't expect it to be so fast. Zi originally didn't want to serve Chu Qingyan. Seeing Hong Yi's signal, she reluctantly lowered her head and said perfunctorily, Zi greets ninth young Miss Chu. It wasn't that Chu Qingyan didn't feel that this person was dissatisfied with her. She didn't know how she had offended her, but when she first saw her, Chu Qingyan felt that this person wasn't easy to get along with. Since she had already been arranged, she had to be polite on the surface. Moreover, she was still a young girl who didn't know the world, so she smiled. Sister Z, you're too polite. When Z heard this, she pursed her lips and said sarcastically, ninth young Miss Chu, Z doesn't dare to be called sister. You're the master, and this servant is the servant. The King of England's residence isn't an ordinary small household. There should be rules. Only those who come from small households can call each other sister. Although you're still young, I hope that you'll pay attention to your words and actions in the future. Otherwise, the one who will lose face will be my lord. Chu Qingyan only said one sentence, but she was ridiculed by Zi. Chu Qingyan felt that this arrogant Zi in front of her was really eloquent. Hong Yi immediately turned around and scolded, Zi, don't be rude. Then she turned to face Chu Qingyan and said apologetically, ninth young Miss Chu, Zi has just been trained. There are many rules that she doesn't know. If she offends you in any way, please forgive her. Chu Qingyan knew that Hong Yi was giving her a way out. After all, she was a young girl who didn't have any status or wealth. She didn't have any status in the prince's residence. If she really wanted to compete with the head maidservant who was specially trained by the King of England, she was afraid that it would be like striking a stone with an egg. Chu Qingyan rode down the slope on the donkey. She smiled and waved her hand. Qingyan is still young and doesn't know some rules. I hope that Zi will correct me when the time comes. Hong Yi looked at Chu Qingyan and felt that she was too obedient for her age. She was suspicious, but there were stewards waiting for her to arrange things outside. She gave Zi a few words and left. After Hong Yi left, Zi raised her chin and didn't look at Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan only hoped that Zi wouldn't find trouble. As for other words, she didn't care. Xining saw that the situation was a little stiff and couldn't help but turn her eyes. She immediately thought of something to tell her master. Master, do you know that Gui was beaten 50 times by Lord? Chu Qingyan was a little surprised. What happened? Xining shook her head and said, this servant doesn't know. But after Lord left Master's room last night, he let Gui go to the steward to receive the punishment. I heard that Gui didn't go to Lord's side to be on duty today and is recuperating in the room. Zi, who was standing at the side, heard the conversation between the master and servant and snorted coldly, ninth young Miss Chu, don't pretend to be stupid. If it wasn't for you, how could Gui be punished by Lord? She didn't expect that Lord would punish brother Gui because Chu Qingyan was injured. She had known about Chu Qingyan's existence from the instructors and nannies long ago. She didn't like her. Now that brother Gui was punished because of her, she resented her to the extreme and spoke without thinking. Chu Qingyan was too lazy to argue with her. A dog that barks doesn't bite and a dog that bites doesn't bark. She still understood this principle. But Gui's matter made her lower her eyebrows and think carefully. Could it really be related to her? Ze, how can you say that? We are servants. How can we offend our superiors? Xining was angry in her heart. Even if her mistress didn't want to argue with Ze, it didn't mean that she, as her mistress's trusted servant, could tolerate her rudeness to her mistress. Ze sneered, as if she didn't put Xining in her eyes. She was just a little servant. She ignored the angry Xining and lazily bowed to Chu Qingyan. This servant will go to the kitchen to see ninth young Miss Chu's breakfast. After saying that, she didn't wait for Chu Qingyan's response and turned to leave. Xining was about to stop her, but was stopped by her mistress. Let her be. Chu Qingyan's mind was still on Xiao Su helping her vent her anger. She never took this kind of small matter to heart. Xining saw that her mistress really didn't care about Ziyi's rudeness and felt that it was unfair to her mistress. But she still obediently shut her mouth. Her mistress had her reasons for doing things, and she just had to listen. Inside the study, Xiao Su flipped through the secret report that his subordinate had just sent, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Hualing, who was standing to the side, was holding back his words. He didn't know if he should ask and couldn't help but scratch his head. Xiao Su looked at him. What is it? Hualing giggled when he heard this. Mistress, it's nothing. I'm just a little curious. Why did you suddenly punish Gui? Is it because he didn't protect ninth young Miss Chu well? Disobeying orders and leaving his post. Aren't these two crimes enough? Xiao Su flipped through a page of the letter and said in a casual tone. Hualing quickly smiled. Enough? Enough? Actually, what he really wanted to ask was that Gui was one of the Empress people. In the past, no matter what Gui or Gu Rong did wrong, Lord rarely punished them. But now, for Chu Qingyan, he made an exception. One had to look at the owner before hitting a dog. Hitting Gui was clearly a slap to the Empress face. For Chu Qingyan, Lord was willing to go to this step. He couldn't help but be amazed. What ability did that Chu Qingyan have to make Lord do this for her? Hualing looked at Chu Qingyan for the first time. Chapter 74. Ever since she woke up, Chu Qingyan rarely saw Xiao Su's shadow. When she learned that the Sichuan emperor had given him an order to punish him if he couldn't find the escaped assassins, Chu Qingyan sometimes thought about it and felt that Xiao Su's life was really hard. However, she also didn't know how she could help. Instead, she was still a patient. Forget it, it was better for her to honestly recuperate and not cause trouble for him. In the past 2 days, the new maidservant, Ze, acted like she was Xiao Su's head maidservant. She often held her chin high and ordered Xining around arrogantly. She was even more of a master than her master, Chu Qingyan. However, Chu Qingyan let her be. It was better to have someone by her side who showed all her emotions on her face than someone who hid a knife behind a smile. Xining had always been heartless and didn't put this person in her eyes. It was fine as long as she didn't bully her master. Because the courtyard that Chu Qingyan was arranged to be in was really too far away, Xiao Su ordered people to pack up her things and arrange for her to stay in Yushuan Courtyard. From the time she was recuperating until now, Chu Qingyan had been living in Yushuan Courtyard, so there wasn't any inconvenience. Besides, she didn't have many things, so she let Xining pack up and moved over. Yushuan Courtyard was much more lively than her small courtyard. There were at least 20 to 30 servants, but each of them had their own rules. Everyone knew that His Highness the Prince of Ing did not like noisy people, so each of them walked like a cat, without making a sound. However, for some reason, there was a bit of noise outside today. She was just about to ask Xining when she suddenly heard that the fourth prince had arrived. She couldn't help but narrow her eyes. What was this person doing here? As soon as she finished speaking, a youth in embroidered clothes answered and stepped into the room. Under the guidance of Hong Yi, Xiao Ran strode over to Chu Qingyan. Seeing that her complexion was good, he felt relieved. I heard from Imperial older brother that you sprained your ankle, so this prince came to take a look at you out of goodwill. Xiao Ran sat down on a chair that a servant had moved over and pretended to speak casually. Actually, he had purposely snuck out of the imperial palace this time. If it wasn't for his eldest imperial brother entering the imperial palace to see his imperial father yesterday, he wouldn't have known that she was injured. Originally, he felt a bit of guilt towards her, but this time, he felt even more guilty. Moreover, ever since that hurried farewell at the city gate that day, that pair of pure, watery eyes would appear in his mind from time to time, as if they were filled with a lake of stars, causing him to be unable to forget for a long time. Her face was constantly in his mind, and he couldn't sleep or eat in peace. He thought that it must be because in these past 12 years, he had never felt guilty about bringing disaster to anyone. So he must feel guilty towards Chu Qingyan, so his mind was filled with her. So today, when his imperial mother wasn't paying attention, he secretly ran over to the King of England's manor with his guards. He only wanted to see her and properly apologize to her, so that the strange feeling would dissipate. However, he had always been used to being aloof. Normally, it was others who flattered him, so he had never lowered his head to anyone. So when he opened his mouth, his tone was extremely arrogant, as if he was saying that this prince personally came to see her and that it was her good fortune. This immediately angered Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes, but she also knew that the other party had a noble status, so she just treated it as listening to the chirping of a parrot. In any case, his clothes today were very colorful, which really suited the image of a parrot. Thank you for your concern, fourth prince. Although Xiao was favored, he had also grown up in the harem, so his ability to read people's expressions was not bad. So when he heard the perfunctory tone in Chu Qingyan's words, he immediately became annoyed. In order to avoid the mama, this young master had spent a Herculean effort. Not only did he climb out of the window, in order to avoid the patrolling guards, he even laid in the grass for half an hour. He was bitten by mosquitoes several times, so it was still itchy. When had he ever suffered this kind of hardship? Wasn't it all to come out and see her? What kind of tone is that? Xiao became angry. Chu Qingyan originally thought that this person who was born in the imperial family, no matter how unruly and willful he was, he wouldn't be so inexperienced. Don't you understand that harmony is the most important thing? If he got angry because of a disagreement, then it was still acceptable. But it was clear that she had not offended him, so how did she offend this little ancestor? It seems like she had overestimated his temper. I don't know how Qingyan offended fourth prince. I hope that fourth prince will not be angry. Chu Qingyan pretended to be terrified as she lowered her head. Xiao could tell that she was acting, and his heart became even more furious. He couldn't help but stand up, wanting to fling his sleeves and leave. But after taking 2 steps, he felt that he had spent so much effort to come here just to quarrel with her, so it wasn't worth it. Thinking of his original intention, he couldn't help but suppress his anger and silently muttered a few words. In this world, only vile people and women were hard to deal with. Then he walked back to his seat and sat down. Originally, when she saw that he was about to leave, Chu Qingyan's heart gave a sigh of relief. Her small temple couldn't accommodate a big Buddha like him, but in a blink of an eye, the situation changed. This time it was her turn to be puzzled. Wasn't this person leaving? Why did he stay behind? However, the scene quickly changed. The anger on Xiao face faded, and he recovered his original expression. He leaned against the back of the chair and looked at Chu Qingyan as he said, "Forget it. This highness will not stoop to the level of a vile person and will not haggle with you." Chu Qingyan blushed with shame. Xiao saw that he had succeeded in making her suffer and was in a good mood. He waved his hand, and the attendant behind him brought out a food box and presented it in front of Chu Qingyan. Under Chu Qingyan's puzzled gaze, Xiao then slowly explained and arrogantly said, "This is the desserts that this highness has brought for you. No need to be too grateful. Consider it as compensation for this assassination attempt." A few plates of desserts were enough to compensate for the injuries she had suffered for him. This life of his was too cheap. Moreover, she had previously suffered from the poison desserts, and she didn't want to repeat the same mistake. Thank you, Fourth Highness, for your good intentions. But Qingyin still has lingering fears when she sees these desserts, so you should bring them back and enjoy them yourself. Chu Qingyin thought for a moment, and in order to avoid provoking this fiend, she tried her best to be tactful. This was the first time he had actually been disdained when he sent them out. Xiao flew into a rage out of humiliation. You really don't know what's good for you. Bai Feng, let's go. Bai Feng, who was called out, immediately responded. Then he asked in distress, Your Highness, take the desserts? How can this Highness take back something that he has given out? Since she doesn't want it, then take it out and feed it to the dogs. Xiao glared at Chu Qingyan and then angrily flung his sleeves and left. Yes. Bai Feng glanced at the young lady on the bed. He didn't expect that this person would actually make his Highness so angry to the point of smoke coming out of his head. He felt some admiration in his heart and nodded at Chu Qingyan before quickly chasing after his Highness. Master, Fourth Highness seems to be very angry. Xining clicked her tongue. It's not seems, it's definitely and definitely, Chu Qingyan said without a care in the world. The moment she finished speaking, Chu Qingyan stretched her body and said to Xining, I'm a little hungry. See if Huangyi has made any new tricks and bring them over for me to try. Thinking about those pastries that Huangyi had made, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but drool. Although she had chosen to study pastry making in the modern world, she couldn't help but admit that Huangyi's skills were really not bad. Master, didn't you righteously reject Fourth Prince's desserts and say that you still have lingering fears over them? Xining blinked her large eyes innocently. Darling, you know too much. Chu Qingyan's lips curled into a smile. She just didn't like Fourth Prince. Why wouldn't she like him? It was obvious that as long as she had any contact with him, she would definitely be unlucky. He was obviously a jinx. Other than this reason, she thought about it and felt that it had something to do with Big Ice Cube. Chapter 75. After Xiao left, Yushuan Courtyard regained its peace. Zi had said that she was going to prepare breakfast for her, but she had disappeared without a trace. She curved her lips into a faint smile. For some people, the more mistakes they made, the faster they received their retribution. Anyway, she was not the proper master of this courtyard. She had no right to punish them, but there would naturally be someone else to do so. She held the hibiscus pastry that Xining had prepared for her in advance to fill her stomach as she leisurely passed the time. However, after a while, Yushuan Courtyard began to bustle with noise and excitement again. Chu Qingyan listened to the noises that were even noisier than before and couldn't help but be puzzled. Could it be that Xiao had returned? He was really like a ghost that wouldn't go away. As soon as she thought this, she heard rustling sounds coming from afar. Kai, Daddy is here to see you. Kai, where are you? Don't play hide and seek with Daddy. Chu Qingyan was instantly stunned, and the pastry in her hand fell to the ground. Wasn't that Daddy's voice? She couldn't be bothered to clean up and immediately scratched her head to look at the door. At this moment, a gentle voice sounded. Yuan Lang, don't be anxious. You'll see Kai when you enter. Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up. Mother was here too. As if to verify Chu Qingyan's thoughts, a man jumped into the room with light steps, and a woman followed closely behind. Kai. The moment Father Chu entered the room, his eyes widened as he searched everywhere. When he saw his precious daughter whom he had been thinking about day and night, he immediately dashed over, tripping over a few chairs in the process. Yuan Lang, slow down. Mother Chu was also happy to see her daughter, but she was more worried about Father Chu, the eldest child, so she repeatedly advised him. But how could Father Chu care about that? He rushed to the bed like a whirlwind, looked at his daughter, and said with a smile, Kai, Daddy has caught you. You've lost. To be able to see her parents in Prince Ying's residence was simply out of her expectations. It was better to say that she suspected that she was dreaming. However, When her parents were really standing in front of her, she believed her eyes. "Daddy is great. You win again this time." Chu Qingyin responded to him with a smile. What could be happier than reuniting with his family? Mr. Chu felt as if he was floating in the air after being praised by his daughter. Chu Qingyin finally had the time to ask her mother, "Mother, why are you and father here?" Mrs. Chu was a little confused. "Didn't you say that you missed us and asked me to bring your father here to visit you?" Chu Qingyin frowned. She didn't say that. At this moment, Hong Yi, who was walking behind them, also came in. She happened to overhear their conversation and said with a smile, "Ninth young Miss Chu, it's like this. Lord thought that you would be bored if you stayed in the room to recuperate, so he sent someone to the Chu estate to bring the two in-laws here to talk to you." Hong Yi was a transparent person. She left with a smile after she finished speaking. She knew that this family wanted to talk about some intimate things, so she left them some space. Chu Qingyin didn't expect the truth to be like this. She thought that her mother had come to visit because she knew that she was injured, but she didn't expect that the iceberg would take her feelings of missing her family into consideration. It really surprised her. When Mother Chu heard Hong Yi mention that her daughter was injured, she immediately became nervous. She held her daughter's hand with both hands, wanting to check where she was injured. "Kai, why are you injured? Where are you injured? Is it serious?" No wonder her daughter was lying on the bed when they came in. She originally wanted to remind her that the prince's residence wasn't like her own home, so she couldn't be too casual. She didn't know that she was injured. As a mother, her heart clenched and she didn't care that there were other people around her. Chu Qingyin immediately pulled her mother's hand down and shook her head with a smile. "Mother, it's nothing serious. I just accidentally sprained my leg. I'll be fine in a few days. Don't you see that my complexion is still rosy? So you don't have to worry." She didn't dare to tell her mother about the assassination attempt. Otherwise, it would be unfilial of her to make her mother worry for no reason. Moreover, it was all in the past. Thus, after a few groups of daughters acted coquettishly, most of Mother Chu's worries were dispelled. "That's good." Mother Chu breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, Chu Machen's father, who had been jumping around, immediately came over when he heard that his precious daughter's foot was injured. Because Chu Machen's mother was sitting and he was standing, his eyes scanned his daughter from head to toe like a radar. He immediately found that something was wrong. "Kai, why is your leg as big as a white jade steamed bun?" Because her ankle was wrapped in gauze and it was too warm under the blanket, she left it outside. She didn't expect that her father's sharp eyes would discover it. It was too late for her to take it back now. She looked into her mother's stern eyes and smiled embarrassedly. "I'll really be fine in a few days." No, no, no. People say that it takes 100 days to recover from a serious injury. Kai, I reckon you'll have to spend the rest of the summer in bed. I originally wanted you to accompany me to the pond to fish, but it's a pity that you can't do it anymore. Forget it. I'll get a scallion to help me weave a net for fishing. Father Chu shook his head regretfully. Sigh. Her father had exposed her just like that. Chu Qingyin covered her face with her hands. Mother Chu sighed softly and said sympathetically, "This child. You're making Mother more worried by hiding your injury. It's a pity that Mother can't be by your side to take care of you. Seeing you like this makes Mother feel bad too." Xining, who was standing at the side, quickly chimed in, "Madam-in-law, don't worry. Master has this servant by her side. This servant will take good care of Master. Please don't worry." Mother Chu looked at the maidservant in front of her. Although she was young, she spoke and acted appropriately. For example, when they entered the door just now, this little maidservant immediately prepared 2 cups of tea and even prepared pastries. It was clear that she was a nimble person. She came to the prince's residence this time to see her daughter's environment. Seeing that she had such a clever maidservant by her side, she was more or less relieved. What a good child. Mother Chu reached into her sleeve and took out a 5 lotus pouch for her. "This is to buy you some snacks." Xining saw this and quickly waved her hands. She shook her head and said, "Madam-in-law, you're too polite. It's this servant's duty to take care of master. Xining doesn't deserve it. After saying this, Xining turned to her master for help. Chu Qingyin couldn't help laughing when she saw this. Just take it. My mother is also kind. Since his master had spoken, Xining happily took it over and thanked him profusely. Knowing that Xining was her daughter's confidant, Mother Chu carefully asked about her daughter's big and small matters in the mansion of the King of England. At that time in the restaurant, the King of England was present, so there were many things that she didn't mention. Now that she had the opportunity, she grabbed her daughter and asked her carefully. Father Chu swayed left and right in the room. From time to time, he would listen to the mother and daughter's conversation. But when the mother and daughter finished talking, they found that Father Chu had disappeared. Chapter 76. Xining, where's my father? Chu Qingyin hurriedly asked Xining, who was serving beside her, after seeing that there was no one around. Seeing that her master was so worried, Xining immediately replied, just now, this servant seems to have heard old master say that he wanted to go to the pond to take a look. Pond? Where's the pond? Chu Qingyin was confused. The King of England's residence was very large, and she hadn't had the chance to walk around. Hearing this, she couldn't help but feel a little confused. At this moment, Mother Chu suddenly thought of something. She immediately said, could it be the lake that your father and I passed by just now? Xining chimed in, Master, there's a lotus pond in the front yard. Perhaps that's where the old master went. The lotus flowers in the pond have been growing very well these days. This servant originally wanted to take you to have a look after master's foot injury recovered. Chu Qingyin's mouth twitched, and she said to Xining, quickly go and find my father. Don't let him get into trouble. Xining didn't know that Father Chu's current state was no different from that of a child. Seeing that her master was so worried, she immediately went to look for him. Mother Chu was also worried and followed her. Chu Qingyin face-bombed. She couldn't forget that when they were in Mao village, their neighbor, Auntie Li, had planted a lot of taro in the mud. She wanted to wait for a good harvest in the coming days to prepare for winter. Who knew that when father saw that the leaves were beautiful, he pulled them up one by one, plucked the leaves, and used them to build a canopy for the bird's nest on the tree. Auntie Li was so angry that she lay on the ground and wanted to cry, but no tears came out. In the end, her mother personally came to apologize to Auntie Li with a bag of white flour. Auntie Li was so happy that she let bygones be bygones. This time, she saw that the lotus leaves were bigger than the taro leaves. She didn't know if father would come up with any more trouble. She plucked the leaves and used them to build a canopy. Chu Qingyin was speechless. As the saying goes, the daughter knows her father best. Just now, Chu Machen's father was thinking about the huge lotus leaves in the yard. He thought that it would definitely rain heavily in a few days. He didn't know if the birds in the village would have a roof to shelter them from the rain without him around. Therefore, this time, he wanted to take these big leaves back and hide them. When he returned to Mao village, he would give these leaves to the birds. This way, they would no longer have to worry about not having a roof to shelter them from the wind and rain. But when he reached the pond, he started to feel troubled. The leaves were all in the middle of the pond. He couldn't pick them. If only Kai Kai was here. Kai Kai was so smart. She would definitely have a way to pick them. Chu Machen's father originally wanted to go back and call his daughter, but then he remembered that her foot was injured, so he gave up the idea. He looked at the lotus leaf in the middle of the pool, then at his hand, and then at his foot. Perhaps he could reach it. So he rolled up his sleeves, stood on his tiptoes, leaned his body, and stretched out his hand towards the lotus leaves, desperately trying to reach them. At this moment, a few servants passed by and saw this scene. They immediately exclaimed, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Chu Machen's father was frightened. Before his hand could reach the leaves, his foot slipped, and his entire body was about to fall into the pond. Kai Kai, Chu Machen's father subconsciously shouted, "Hualing." With a low call, the person beside him immediately flew over. Chu Machen's father, who was about to touch the surface of the pond, was scooped up and landed safely on the ground. After Chu Machen's father steadied himself, he clapped his hands happily and said with a smile, "My daughter is the best. Every time I call her, she can always turn danger into safety." As he spoke, Chu Machen's father turned around and saw Hua Ling's dark face. His smile instantly disappeared. He pointed at him and said, "Who are you? Are you the reinforcements sent by Kai Kai?" This one is Hualing. After speaking, Hualing no longer paid any attention to Chu Machen's father. He turned around and bowed to his master who was walking towards him. The moment Hualing turned around, Chu Machen's father saw Xiao Su. He immediately pushed Hualing away happily and walked up to him with a smile. "Inverted onion, why are you here? Did Kai Kai tell you to come? So you want to play with me?" Xiao Su had interacted with Chu Machen's father a few times. He knew that this person liked to pester him, so he didn't want to show his face in front of him. However, who knew that Chu Machen's father wouldn't play with him and insisted on playing with that lotus leaf, almost causing him to fall into the pond. Since he was Chu Qingyan's father, then he couldn't just sit by and watch. That was why he had Hualing save him and prevent him from falling into the pond. Xiao Su wasn't used to people being so close to him, so he took a step back without leaving a trace. He ignored Chu Machen's other questions and only answered the first one, "I just happened to pass by." "So it's like that." Chu Machen's father also took a step forward without leaving a trace. He looked at Xiao Su with a mischievous smile, not moving an inch. Although he was used to people looking at him, this was the first time someone dared to look at him so boldly in front of him. Xiao Su wanted to turn around and leave, but his many years of upbringing didn't allow him to do so. Thus, his eyes twitched as he asked, "Does the Chu family's great master have any other instructions?" "I don't have any instructions. I'm waiting for your reply." Chu Machen's father looked at him innocently. "You still haven't answered my other questions." Ling couldn't help but want to laugh on the side, but fortunately he held it in. He quickly lowered his head and coughed softly. Xiao Su looked in Hua Ling's direction before his gaze landed on Chu Machen's father. He couldn't help but frown. Chu Machen's father saw the inverted onion frown and thought that he had forgotten his previous question. He sighed and said, "Inverted onion's son-in-law, why is your memory so bad at such a young age? Aren't you worried that you'll forget where you hide good food in the future? Forget it. Father will remind you one more time." Chu Machen's father naturally didn't see Xiao Su's pale face because it was covered by the mask. Chu Machen's father turned around and left after saying this. Not only Hua Ling, but even Xiao Su was confused. They didn't know what Chu Machen's father was planning. While Hua Ling was confused, Chu Machen's father dragged him in front of him and then Chu Machen's father pushed him away and then happily jumped towards Xiao Su. "Inverted onion, why are you here? Did Kai Kai tell you to come? So you want to play with me?" The two's eyes twitched at the same time. Xiao Su face-bombed. Sure enough, the rumors about Chu Huayuan being stupid and ignorant were true. Hua Ling was stunned as he stared at Father Chu in a daze. He was a first-class fierce cavalry expert under His Highness, but he had been pushed by an ignorant person like this. Moreover, he had been pushed twice in a row. If this spread out, where would he put his face? But Chu Machen's father didn't have the time to care about this expert's glass heart. He continued to ramble on to Xiao Su. "This is the replay of the case that Kai Kai mentioned. Do you remember it? Hurry up and answer. You're not allowed to remain silent. Otherwise, explaining is covering it up and silence is acquiescence. Like this, you'll have to play with me." Chu Machen's father proudly said the words that Kai Kai usually said. He imitated it quite well. Xiao Su felt the corners of his eyes twitch even more. Chapter 77. Seeing the childlike eyes in front of him, Xiao Su subconsciously wanted to turn and leave. But when he moved, Father Chu immediately moved. Father Chu blocked him, his expression turning from joy to grievance. Son-in-law, do you hate father? You clearly didn't know how to do it before. Obediently let me carry you home. You even promised to help me weave a fishing net and play with me. Before Father Chu finished speaking, he was interrupted by Xiao Su. This prince couldn't speak at the time. When did I promise you anything? Father Chu's face was full of shock. You didn't say you didn't agree at the time. Silence is tacit agreement, don't you know? Even Kai understands this. You're a lord's pimple, aren't you? Xiao Su couldn't help but have the urge to burst out in anger. But when he saw Father Chu's careful gaze, his anger was immediately extinguished. He finally compromised. This prince still has matters to attend to right now, so I can't play with you. This prince will leave Huoling behind. You can look for him if you need anything. Not wanting to bicker with him, Xiao Su thought of investigating the case and had the intention to leave. Master, you mustn't. This subordinate still has matters to attend to with you. How can I stay here? Huoling didn't think that he would be caught by his master for just snickering and be punished so quickly. His face instantly turned bitter. Father Chu glared at Huoling. You're disdaining me, but I'm the one disdaining you. When he turned to face Xiao Su, he put on an amiable expression. It's fine. You can just play with father for an hour. It won't delay matters. Play? These two words were so far away from him. It was as if from the moment he was born, childlike innocence didn't belong to him. Xiao Su silently looked at the person in front of him. In the end, he didn't say anything and tacitly agreed. Huoling covered his eyes with both hands, not daring to believe that his master would actually agree to such an outrageous request. But after that, he couldn't believe it anymore. Because Father Chu pointed at the pond and said to Xiao Su, Son-in-law, I want the lotus leaves. Xiao Su said to Huoling, Go. Huoling received the order and flew out. He picked a lotus leaf and flew back, handing it to Father Chu. Mr. Chu pointed at the pond and said to Xiao Su, Son-in-law, I want the pebbles. Xiao Su asked Huoling, Did you hear that? Huoling had a sad face and immediately flew over. He picked up a pebble and gave it to Father Chu. Mr. Chu pointed at the pond and said to Xiao Su, Son-in-law, I want that fish. Without waiting for his master to turn around and give the order, Huoling's ears drooped as he accepted his fate and flew over. He casually grabbed his long sword and wanted to stab the swimming fish. Unexpectedly, Mr. Chu suddenly said, Wait, I want her alive. Huoling couldn't stop in time and his internal strength leaked, causing his entire body to fall into the pond. Father Chu covered his eyes, not daring to look. Finally, he heard the sound of water splashing and opened his fingers. He saw Huoling standing up with a lotus leaf on his head. On the lotus leaf, there was a small fish jumping around. It was as funny as it could get. Not only did Mr. Chu not give him any face, even Xiao Su, who didn't smile much, had a slight smile on his face. Huoling wanted to cry but had no tears. Was it because he had schemed against Chu Qingyan before and exposed Chu Qingyan's escape? Was that why Mr. Chu was here to collect his debt? Huoling was angry, but he didn't dare to say anything. He took the lotus leaf off his head and handed the small fish to Mr. Chu. Mr. Chu took the small fish and patted Huoling's shoulder, saying, You've worked hard, little rascal. I can make you a master fisherman in the future. Huoling couldn't help but want to twitch his lips. Can you not hold back your laughter when you're saying thanks? Also, can you not look at me with disdain when you want to pat my shoulder? I'll say it again. I'm not some little rascal. I'm a top expert underlord. Also, what the hell is a master fisherman? It was rare for Xiao Su to see his subordinate suffer. At this time, he stood on the side with great interest and enjoyed the scene as if it had nothing to do with him. He ignored his subordinate's pleading eyes. After a while, Xiao Su felt that it was getting late. He was about to speak when he heard footsteps from afar, accompanied by shouts. Yuanlang, master-in-law. Xiao Su frowned. He didn't know why they were suddenly making a ruckus. At this time, he saw Mr. Chu's expression change. He became flustered and serious as he stuffed the lotus leaf and the fish in his hand to his son-in-law. Inverted scallion, help me take care of Xiao Bao. The leaf is for its blanket, and the pebble is for its toy. Treat it well. I'll come back often to see it, and I'll also come to see you often. Don't be jealous. You played with me very happily today. I won't tell Kai Kai that you were lazy and didn't do anything. Moi. After saying this, Mr. Chu ran off like a wisp of smoke. Hua Ling clicked his tongue. This unreliable person ran faster than a rabbit. Also, when did this fish have a name? Who could tell him where this name came from? However, saying that his master was playing with First Old Master Chu, it was clearly him who was being played by First Old Master Chu. Master Chu moved his mouth, Master moved his eyes, and he had to immediately carry it out. This was simply too much of a bully. Could there still be trust between people? Xiao Su heard the Chu family couple's voices not far away. Then he slowly lowered his head to look at the fish and leaf that Mr. Chu stuffed into his hand. After a moment of silence, he threw them to Hua Ling. Hua Ling quickly caught them and asked in confusion, Master, what do you want to do? Take care of it. Xiao Su left these words and left with large strides. Hua Ling lowered his head when he heard this and stared at the little fish in the lotus leaf. He couldn't help wanting to cry. Just who did he offend? Why was he always the one getting hurt? Mr. Chu obediently returned to the main courtyard after being found by Mrs. Chu. Father, what did you do in the pond? Chu Qingyin asked with worry. Mr. Chu said with a serious expression, I want to catch some fish. Chu Qingyin looked suspiciously at her father's clean clothes. They were just as good as before. She thought that it was fine as long as he didn't cause any trouble. The Chu family couple sat for a bit longer before leaving. Chu Qingyin originally wanted them to stay for dinner, but it was a pity that Mr. Chu was thinking about the little cat in the manor, so he rushed back. Master, the wife-in-law is really kind and friendly. She's much better than the madams outside. After sending off the Chu family couple, Xining said with a smile. Chu Qingyin rolled her eyes at her with a smile. My mother bought you over like this? Young miss, do you think this servant is that easy to buy over? Xining had a serious expression to show her innocence. Chu Qingyin gently tapped her forehead and said with a smile, Good, good, good. You're the hardest to buy over. Xining giggled. Thinking of what happened just now, she said, when this servant went to look for the husband-in-law, I think I saw Lord by the pond. I wonder if the husband-in-law ran into him. Chu Qingyin shook her head. She didn't know either. Run into what? Speak of the devil. Xiao Su stepped into the room and walked towards her. Chapter 78. Chu Qingyin raised her head and saw Xiao Su walking towards her. Chu Qingyin did not suspect anything and casually said, Xining said that when she was looking for my father, she happened to see your highness by the pond. So, Qingyin wants to know if your highness met with my father? Chu Qingyin, who was tidying up her sleeves, did not notice that when she said this, Xiao Su's footsteps paused slightly. It seemed a bit unnatural, but Xiao Su quickly returned to normal. When Chu Qingyin looked at him, he was already fine. I saw him. Xiao Su sat down on the chair in front of her bed and casually replied. Hearing Xiao Su's reply, Chu Qingyin subconsciously tensed up. She did not forget what her father did to Xiao Su at the restaurant. At this time, she glanced at him, but unfortunately, she could not see anything from his eyes. Moreover, he never revealed his emotions, so she carefully probed. Then did my father say anything? Or did he do anything by the pond? What do you think your father would say? Xiao Su asked back. Chu Qingyin choked. Was this person trying to fish for information? Chu Qingyin immediately shook her head. I don't know. I'm just a bit curious. What did my father do by the pond for so long? Play with Hualing, Xiao Su said without changing his expression. He was not lying. Although he promised Father Chu to play with him, the one who really played with him was Hualing. Seeing that Xiao Su did not have any unhappy expression, she knew that her father was playing with Hualing. Chu Qingyin let out a sigh of relief. As long as her father did not provoke the big ice cube, it was fine. Otherwise, with the big ice cube's temper, it would be very easy for her father to step on his landmines. At that time, if she wasn't there, her father would suffer a calamity. However, she also felt that her father wasn't the kind of person who would easily be taken advantage of. It was just that the person in front of her was a big ice cube, so it was hard to say. However, it was clear that Chu Qingyin had forgotten one thing. Why would Hua Ling play with her father for no reason? Do you still feel pain in your feet? Xiao Su looked at her feet and asked. Obviously, she felt that Xiao Su did not want to continue the topic, so she replied, It's a little better, but when I move, my ankle still hurts. It's normal. The inflammation is still there. It will subside in 2 days. Xiao Su, who was usually a man of few words, spoke more than usual. Don't worry about Ethereal's medical skills. After Chu Qingyin heard this, a touch of warmth floated in her heart. She thought that Xiao Su was worried that she would be afraid, so he deliberately explained and comforted her. Yes. Chu Qingyin nodded. Then she looked at him and slowly said the words she wanted to say when she saw him. Your Highness, thank you for bringing my father and mother to see me. I'm very happy. This king said that he would compensate you. Xiao Su's mood did not fluctuate because of her words, but he calmly replied. Towards Xiao Su's reaction, Chu Qingyin felt that it was very normal. He was never a person who liked to show off what he did to gain other people's gratitude. When he said that he would compensate her, she thought that he was just casually saying it to appease her heart, but he kept his promise and fulfilled it the next day. Only she never thought that his compensation would be bringing her father and mother to the King of England's palace. She had thought of meeting her father and mother after the disaster, but between life and death, she was most concerned about them. However, he had carefully arranged it for her, which made her feel a bit moved. Then can my father and mother still come to the king's palace in the future? Perhaps it was because she was happy that she blurted it out without thinking. But when his eyes looked over, she was a bit hesitant. Would he think that she was reaching for a yard after getting an inch? Xiao Su did not mistake the annoyance in her eyes. Could it be that in her eyes, he was a cruel tiger and wolf without any human feelings? He looked at her and calmly said, It's not that you can't, but... Chu Qingyin's eyes lit up. But what? You have to cooperate with Ethereal and properly treat your foot. Although in front of him, she always acted like an obedient child, Xiao Su knew that it was all just an appearance. She was not a person who could control her temper, so he made a few rules with her. No problem. Chu Qingyin reached out her hand and placed it in front of her forehead, looking very cute as she saluted. Xiao Su faintly averted his gaze and declined to comment. At this time, Zi walked in with a bowl of medicine. Her face was filled with displeasure as she said in an unkind tone, The medicine is ready. Because Zi's head was raised, her eyes were looking up, so she did not notice that her lord was sitting in the room. These disrespectful words clearly made Xiao Su frown. Chu Qingyin looked at Xiao Su. She lowered her brow, and her lips curled. She had thought that it would be a while before this servant girl would shoot herself in the foot. She did not think that this day would come faster than she thought. When Zi walked to the bed, she saw a familiar black color from the corner of her eyes. She was a bit confused, but when she lowered her head, she met with a pair of sharp eyes. Her entire body trembled and she began to tremble. Wang, Lord, why are you here? What? Is there anywhere in this king's palace that Bin Wang cannot go? Could it be that Bin Wang needs to report his whereabouts to you? Xiao Su coldly said. Zi had already been frightened by her lord's imposing manner. Now that his words fell, her entire body turned cold. With a putong sound, she knelt down and said with a pale face, This servant does not dare. This servant misspoke. This servant does not dare. When she knelt down, Chu Qingyin clearly heard the sound of bones hitting the ground. However, she did not feel pity for Zi, because she knew that if she was the one kneeling on the ground, Zi would clap her hands and cheer. She would even mock her. Xiao Su raised his hand to indicate for her to stop. He rarely punished the servants in the inner courtyard. Everything was always handled by Hong Yi. Moreover, in front of him, no one dared to offend him. So, this was the first time Xiao Su faced this kind of situation. Seeing her terrified face, he ordered, Bring the medicine up. When Zi saw that Lord had spared her, she immediately handed over the bowl of medicine. However, the moment she handed it over, she regretted it. Her face became even paler. However, there was no chance for her to take it back. Xiao Su took the bowl from her hand. His expression instantly turned cold, and he heavily slammed the bowl of medicine on the table. The temperature in the room rapidly dropped with that muffled sound. Even Chu Qingyin felt that something was wrong. She couldn't help but look at Xiao Zhuozi in front of the bed. She saw that the medicine in the bowl had not been filtered and was floating on the surface. At this time, there was no heat at all. It could be seen that Zi did not care much about her medicine. Call Hong Yi in. Xiao Su's voice was as cold as ice. As soon as he said this, Chu Qingyin heard the sound of footsteps coming closer and further away. It must be to call Hong Yi. Chapter 79. Very quickly, Hong Yi arrived. When she saw Zi kneeling on the ground, and then looked at the cold air coming from her lord's body, she could guess what was going on. She had thought that Zi was proud and arrogant and would disdain to serve Chu Qingyin, but at least she would abide by her duties. She never thought that Zi would go this far. Greetings to Lord, Ninth Miss Chu. Hong Yi calmly greeted the two. Xiao Su looked towards Hong Yi with a dark expression. This king has always trusted you in your work, but you actually did not notice Zi treating Qingyin so harshly? Could it be that you've been too busy managing the inner court recently and neglected it? Hong Yi's expression changed, and her dignified and calm expression faded. She hurriedly knelt down. Master, it was Hong Yi's negligence. Master, please punish me. Xiao Su did not relax because of Hong Yi's words. If you feel that there are too many matters in the inner court and you are too busy, this king can send someone to help you. These words successfully caused Hong Yi's face to pale. Lord's words meant that he was going to take away her authority, but Hong Yi's expression quickly returned to normal, as if the person who had been at a loss just now wasn't her. She respectfully bowed and replied, I will follow master's orders. Chu Qingyin was leaning against the bed and watching from the side. When she saw the dignified Hong Yi bow, she felt that this matter was almost over, so she tugged at the sleeve of the person beside her. Xiao Su was about to speak when he felt someone gently tug at his sleeve. He couldn't help looking down and seeing the large eyes glaring at him. Your Highness, this has nothing to do with Hong Yi, so don't be angry. It's not a big matter. Perhaps Yi was just being playful. Don't be angry, all right? Chu Qingyin said angrily. Perhaps it was because she had gotten used to being with Xiao Su recently and was no longer afraid of the strong aura he gave off. When facing Chu Qingyin, Xiao Su would automatically put away his cold and distant aura. At this time, Chu Qingyin ignored Hong Yi and Ziyi's stunned gazes and acted intimately with him. Xiao Su did not agree with Chu Qingyin's words. In his eyes, Chu Qingyin was still a child and could not see the inner workings. If it was not for Hong Yi's carelessness and indulgence, Ziyi would not dare to be so impudent. Because the place she lived in was the core courtyard of the Wang Fu. How could the actions of the servants escape her eyes? Also, looking at Ziyi's actions just now, it was likely that this was not the first or second time. However, after thinking carefully, he still obeyed her words. He turned and ordered the two people kneeling on the ground. Hong Yi, take Ziyi away and teach her well. If she cannot change her personality, don't let her out in the future. Hearing this, Ziyi's body shrank. She wanted to raise a hand to beg the King of England for mercy, but was stopped by a look from Hong Yi. This servant understands. Hong Yi bowed in response. Xiao Su swept his eyes over them and then suddenly said in a deep voice, although Qingyin is young, she is already the King of England's consort, the master of the inner courtyard. In the future, if this king finds out that this servant dares to bully the master, this king will punish her severely. These words, you pass them on without changing them. Hong Yi trembled and looked in Chu Qingyin's direction in disbelief. However, she quickly lowered her head and softly replied, Hong Yi will control the servants well. Lord, please do not worry. You can leave, Xiao Su lightly said. Hong Yi bowed and then took the unwilling Ziyi away. Hong Yi had always been a popular person in the inner courtyard. Because the King of England's parents lived in the imperial palace and there were no women in the Wang Fu, she was already the master of the inner courtyard. Xiao Su would always leave some face for her, but no one would have thought that the Lord would punish her because of Chu Qingyin who had just entered the palace. Not only was Hong Yi caught off guard, even all the servants in the Fu felt it was inconceivable. Also, ever since Chu Qingyin had entered the King of England's Fu, their lord had never publicly introduced Chu Qingyin's identity and did not clearly state her position in the Wang Fu. It was because of this that the servants took advantage of the loophole and thought that their lord did not care about this marriage and often made things difficult for her. Now that the lord had given this order, everyone's little hearts instantly trembled and they started to review their daily actions to see if they had offended this young Wang Fei. There were also some servants who were standing on the side who analyzed from this order that in the future, the person with the highest position in the Wang Fu would still be the lord and Chu Qingyin had jumped to second place. The young Wang Fei might be young, but the lord's confidants were all shrewd people, so they could only be respectful when they saw the young Wang Fei in the future. Chu Qingyin did not know that starting from this day, she had become the most popular person in the King of England's Fu. Even the status of Xining by her side had risen with the tide, and the people trying to curry favor with her came wave after wave. After Hong Yi and Zi left, Chu Qingyin looked unblinkingly at the person next to her. Xiao Su was a strict person and could not tolerate servants not following the rules. That Ziyi would be punished was not out of Chu Qingyin's expectations. But she had not thought that maybe Hong Yi had purposely gone easy on her. But it was not worth Xiao Su offending this important person who had taken care of the Wang Fu for so many years for her. She couldn't help but be shocked. Xiao Su tilted his head and met her puzzled expression. He understood what she was thinking. He reached out to stroke her black hair. His voice was not as cold as he had been to Ziyi and Hong Yi. He said faintly, "This is called establishing authority." Establishing authority? Chu Qingyin did not immediately react and blurted out. Xiao Su said, "You are young, your foundation is shallow, your family is poor, your personality is soft, and you are stupid." A cross appeared on Chu Qingyin's forehead. Was she as terrible as he said? Even though some of it was true because of her age and family background, was there a need to say it so bluntly? Xiao Su naturally did not know Chu Qingyin's silent criticism. He continued, "So the servants are respectful to you in front of others and half-hearted behind others. If you want people to believe you, you have to have the ability to make people believe you. It is a pity that you do not have any of these." It seemed to be so. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but look down at her fingers. I can't do anything about the objective factors. If she hadn't taken over this small body, and if her parents were still restrained by the Chu family, with her temperament in the modern world, she definitely wouldn't have let herself suffer. But now, she was enduring humiliation not for herself, but to protect the people she cared about. So she wasn't weak, but the situation required her to endure. Forbearance was an art, and it was also a protective shield. This was an essential disguise for her. Hearing Chu Qingyin's disappointed words, Xiao Su slightly curved his lips. However, there is a way to remedy it. What? Chu Qingyin's interest was piqued, and she couldn't help but open her eyes wide in curiosity. A strong reliance. A strong reliance? Xiao Su lowered his head to meet her gaze. His eyes were as bright as a sea of stars, and his voice was low and pleasant. That's right. This prince is your reliance. As long as this prince acknowledges it, you will be the king of England's consort. You are the princess consort, so you are the master. Who dares to bully you? Chapter 80. That day, Chu Qingyin didn't know when Xiao Su had left. She only knew that his eyes had been deeply engraved in her mind. He said that he was her pillar of support in the princely manner. As long as he acknowledged her, she would be the head of the household, and no one would dare to bully her. So, did that mean that she had been acknowledged? She didn't know why, but her heart surged with indescribable joy and relief. Clap, clap. Suddenly, a pair of large hands appeared in front of her, clapping vigorously in front of her, giving her a fright. "Father, can you stop appearing and disappearing so mysteriously?" Chu Qingyin woke up from her memories and looked at the person in front of her. She couldn't help but chide him in amusement. Father Chu pouted and muttered to Mother Chu behind him, "Danyang, I don't know why Kai Kai is always in a daze. She doesn't even play with me." Mother Chu was holding a needle and thread in her hand, her head lowered as she embroidered. Hearing this, she smiled gently. Kai Kai has grown up and has her own matters to worry about. Just don't disturb her. Father Chu was very unhappy when he heard this. He turned to stare at his daughter. Kai Kai, how can you keep things in your little heart? Hurry and teach father. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat when she heard this. Ever since the last time she mentioned to Xiao Su that her parents should come to the princely manor to play, he had people bring her parents to the manor every day to keep her company. However, he had ordered her father not to disturb him when he had nothing to do, because the day before yesterday, her father had run to the study to look for him and had almost turned the study upside down. When she thought of Xiao Su, she couldn't help but think of the matter of the assassins that the Sichuan emperor had ordered him to investigate. Although Xiao Su had caught all of the assassins and brought them to justice, they were all death warriors. Once they were caught, they all committed suicide by ingesting poison, so all the clues were cut off. However, the Sichuan emperor was not satisfied with this result. He scolded Xiao Su before letting him go. As a result, Chu Qingyin did not have a good impression of this Sichuan emperor whom she had never met before. Thinking of the assassination, Chu Qingyin couldn't help but think of Xiao Ran. Ever since Xiao Ran failed to deliver the pastries last time, he had been reporting to the King of England's residence every day recently, and every time he came to look for her. She was annoyed at first, but in the end, she couldn't be bothered to brush him off. However, as they got to know each other, they came to know that this prince was a famous little genius in the Sichuan kingdom. At the age of 2, he was already familiar with the 4 books and 5 classics. At the age of 3, he could recite poems and eulogies. At the age of 5, he could compose a 7-step poem. At the age of 8, he proposed to control the flood, which was imitated by the neighboring countries. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but have a whole new level of respect for the 4th prince. It turned out that under this good-looking skin, there was real talent and knowledge. It was just that his conduct was a bit lacking. However, he was a proud son of heaven, so it was normal for him to have a bit of arrogance. Speaking of the devil, Chu Qingyin had just thought of this person when he had already appeared in her room. Chu Qingyin, this prince has come to see you. After getting along with each other for a few days, Xiao Ran had already promoted her from a stinky brat to a full name. Xiao Ran was dressed in brocade robes with a piece of jadeite hanging from his waist. Looking at the light green luster shining under the sunlight, it was easy to guess that it was priceless. What wind blew this distinguished guest in today? Perhaps it was the young man's persistent visit, coupled with his undisguised sincerity, but Chu Qingyin was still softened by him. She was no longer as perfunctory towards him as before. Chu Qingyin's parents didn't find it strange to see Xiao Ran. In the beginning, Chu Qingyin's mother was a bit reserved, but after seeing him more often, she bowed to him and went back to doing her own thing. This prince thinks it's the mango style. As he spoke, he waved his hand to the person behind him. The person behind him came forward with a basket and lifted the lid, revealing bright yellow fruits inside. When Chu Qingyin heard him mention mangoes, she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Mangoes were everywhere in the modern world, so she could see them everywhere. However, in ancient times, she couldn't even see mango leaves, let alone mangoes. When the cloth was lifted, she saw mangoes the size of a fist. Chu Qingyin was instantly delighted. Where did you get these? Seeing her smile, Xiao Ran's originally anxious heart immediately relaxed. His heart was filled with joy, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he pretended to be indifferent. These are the fruits offered as tribute by the Western tribes. This prince thinks they're quite fresh. I think a country bumpkin like you probably hasn't even heard of them, so this prince casually brought a few over for you to try. The palace servant holding the basket lowered his head upon hearing this. The 4th prince's lies were truly smooth. The Western fan had only offered a single basket of tribute. The 4th prince had coaxed and tricked imperial concubine Yu and expended a great deal of effort in order to obtain these few. Chu Qingyin saw his expression and knew that these fruits weren't easy to obtain. Although they were rare in ancient times, she had eaten many of them in the modern world. However, she still felt grateful. Many thanks, 4th prince. However, it seems like these fruits are very rare. 4th prince, you should keep them for yourself. How can this prince take back something that he's given out? Also, this prince has several baskets in his palace. Xiao Ran said nonchalantly. Seeing his insistence, Chu Qingyin accepted them. Then, she instructed Xining to peel the fruits and bring them over. Xiao Ran originally wanted to show off how to eat them, but he didn't expect that Chu Qingyin knew even more than he did. Not only did she explain in detail, but she also knew to use a bamboo skewer. He immediately felt defeated. After she finished instructing him, Xiao Ran asked in confusion, "You've eaten them before?" Chu Qingyin clearly sensed his disappointment and couldn't help but shake her head. "No, I've only seen them in some books. But aren't you illiterate?" Hearing her answer, Xiao Ran was clearly happy. However, he was puzzled by another matter. Chu Qingyin coughed lightly. If she had known earlier, she wouldn't have lied in order to save his face. She immediately changed the topic. There's nothing strange about this. There are drawings in some books. I just saw that the drawings were similar to this fruit. I just made a random guess. Oh, right. You didn't leave the palace today to sneak out again, right? Although Chu Qingyin changed the topic abruptly, Xiao Ran still didn't notice. He said in a self-satisfied manner, "That's not true. This prince submitted a thesis that the grand tutor was satisfied with today, so mother gave me a day off." Chu Qingyin face-palmed. So this person came to the prince's estate for a vacation? Not long after, Xining finished peeling the fruit and brought it to the table. There were even bamboo skewers on top. Xiao Ran immediately took a piece and called out to Chu Qingyin. "Hurry and try it. See if it tastes good." Chu Qingyin couldn't refuse his good intentions, so she took it. Meanwhile, Father Chu, who was playing on the side, kept his gaze on the two of them. He snorted coldly. He was going to tell his son-in-law. Chu Qingyin took a bite and felt that the taste wasn't bad. It would be even better if it could be iced. She raised her head and saw that Xiao Ran was waiting for her evaluation. She couldn't help but smile. "Your Fourth Highness, this taste is very unique. You should also try it." Xiao Ran immediately beamed with joy when he heard this. What's not good about this prince's gift? Chu Qingyin saw that this youth finally had a smile that should be on his face at this age and couldn't help but smile as well. However, Xiao Ran turned around and cried out in surprise. "Where's the mango?" He came here from the palace in order to let Chu Qingyin eat it as soon as possible. He hadn't even had a bite yet. Now, he didn't even know what the mango tasted like. Chu Qingyin followed his gaze and saw that the table was empty. The plate of mango had already disappeared. Xining coughed lightly. She didn't see anything. She didn't see her husband take the plate away. She didn't see anything, and that plate of mango was already on its way to the study. Chapter 81. That's right, that plate of mangoes was taken away by Father Chu. At this time, he was filled with anger. His eyes were wide open as he stormed towards the study. He had come to this study many times. Most of the time, he came to play with the scallion upside down, but the scallion upside down always left him to play by himself. The person guarding the door of the study was unfortunately Turin. Turin had left the palace a few days ago and only came back today. He wanted to have a good rest, but he was tricked by Hualing to help him on duty, saying that he wasn't feeling well today. Turin doubtfully agreed. Because he hadn't been in the palace for a while, he didn't know what was going on in the palace. When Father Chu walked over, he immediately shouted coldly, "Who is it? What do you want?" Father Chu saw that the person guarding the door wasn't that brat Hualing, but a stranger. Although he didn't recognize him, he knew that he was someone close to his son-in-law. So he acted familiar and said, "I'm here to find my son-in-law." Black Impermanence quickly opened the door. Because he came back today, he hadn't changed out of his black casual clothes. Turin looked down at his clothes and his eyes twitched. "Impudent." "Impudent? I'm not impudent. I'm not impudent. Quickly let me in. I have an urgent matter to find my son-in-law." Father Chu waved his hand at him. Seeing that this person's mind wasn't clear, Turin suddenly had an impression of this person. Wasn't this Chu Qingyin's father that he and Lord had seen when they visited the Chu family at night? He heard that he was as dumb as a child. Now that he saw him, it was true. Turin didn't like Chu Qingyin to begin with, so he spoke coldly at this time. The study is an important place. How can an outsider like you enter? Quickly leave, otherwise don't blame me for being impolite. Father Chu felt that this person was really stubborn, but he was guarding the door of the study and looked like his martial arts weren't weak. So he said unhappily, "Black impermanence, I already said that I want to see my son-in-law. Why are you blocking me? I'm not the one who wants to see you. Do you not know my identity? Who do you think you are?" Turin retorted. Mr. Chu didn't seem to notice the mockery in his words and smiled proudly. "You'll be scared to death if I tell you, but I won't tell you that I'm Lord's father-in-law. You can ask White Impermanence secretly." What was the White Impermanence? When Turin thought of the white-clothed Hualing, who liked to look at ethereal, his eyes twitched. No wonder Hualing wanted to trick him into working here. He must have known that he would meet this troublesome Father Chu. "If you don't leave, then..." Before Turin could speak, he heard a cold voice coming from the study. "What's the commotion outside?" Turin paused when he heard that. Mr. Chu took the opportunity to push him away and rushed into the study. He shouted, "I have good news and bad news for you." The person in the study was holding a weasel bristle between his fingers and was about to throw it at the intruder, but when he heard the familiar voice that gave him a headache, he immediately stopped and looked at the intruder with a cold expression. "What's the matter?" Xiao Su looked at Turin when he said this. Turin was a little annoyed that he didn't stop this weak Mr. Chu. He cupped his hands and said, "Master." This person wanted to rush in without any explanation. "He said he had something to talk to you about. I didn't let him in, but he kept pestering me." "I didn't pester him. He didn't let me in." Mr. Chu looked wronged. Xiao Su knew Mr. Chu's temperament, so he didn't pursue the matter. He asked, "What's the good news and bad news?" He also knew that if he didn't get to the point with Mr. Chu, he would probably talk for a long time. Mr. Chu was surprised. "Son-in-law, how did you know what I was going to tell you? You're so smart. You're like a roundworm in my stomach." Turin's face darkened. Who was shouting so loudly just now? Xiao Su was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Say it." Mr. Chu didn't care about anything else. He smiled and was about to say something, but when he glanced at Turin, he suddenly glared at him. "I'm only going to tell you these two things. No one else is allowed to come close." The earth spirit was instantly enraged. This person was clearly returning the words that it had said to him just now, but he wasn't worried at all. His master wouldn't let him leave for a fool. "But, Turin, get out." Crack. Turin's face suddenly froze. "Yes, master," he answered woodenly. Turin couldn't believe it at all. He walked out in a daze. "Don't forget to bring me some food," Mr. Chu said to Turin with a smile. After he left, Mr. Chu turned his head and saw his son-in-law looking at him coldly. He couldn't help but shudder, but soon he straightened his chest. His son-in-law was like a block of ice, but his heart was warm. It didn't matter. He didn't believe that he couldn't melt him. "Say it." Xiao Su played with the brush in his hand. He casually leaned against the back of the chair and closed his eyes. He didn't look at the people below. Mr. Chu smiled. "Do you want to hear the good news or the bad news first?" "It's up to you," Xiao Su said indifferently. "Then I'll tell you the good news first," Mr. Chu said happily. The big tabby cat in the mansion gave birth to a litter of kittens. "There are 7 of them. I'm so happy, so happy." Xiao Su already knew that his good news wasn't valuable. He said casually, "Congratulations." He didn't care whether his son-in-law was listening or not. Mr. Chu was happy for a while. Then he suddenly became serious. "Son-in-law, there's another piece of bad news." "What is it?" Xiao Su still said casually, "Someone is eyeing your wife. She's going to be taken away." Mr. Chu said seriously. Xiao Su's indifferent mood was slightly stirred by his serious expression. A corner? A corner in the prince's mansion? It's your fourth younger brother. He's a rich man. He always comes to the mansion to look for Kai Kai. He even sends gifts to please her. Look, this is what he sent. Afraid that his son-in-law wouldn't believe him, Mr. Chu took out the plate that he had been carrying behind him. It was the mango that Chu Qingyin had lost in her room. Mr. Chu had almost eaten it all along the way. Now there were only a few pieces left on the plate. From his description, Xiao Su couldn't associate the word rich with his handsome fourth younger brother. But he unconsciously listened to his words. Seeing that his son-in-law seemed to be a little concerned, Father Chu immediately patted his chest and said loudly, "But don't worry, your corner is very sturdy. I'm old but strong, and I'll guard it for you with a hoe. If anyone tries to steal your corner, I'll beat them up with a hoe." Xiao Su suddenly smiled faintly, and the coldness in his eyes dissipated a lot. When Mr. Chu saw that his son was looking at him, he thought that his son had taken a fancy to the mango in his hand. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. "Son-in-law, I originally wanted to use this fruit to reward you for working hard to support the family, but I accidentally spilled it. Also, your mother hasn't eaten it yet." Xiao Su was misunderstood by his father. The corners of his mouth stiffened. When he saw the yellow fruit shavings at the corner of his mouth, the corners of his eyes twitched. In the end, Mr. Chu happily took the plate back. He also took the brush that his son-in-law was playing with just now. Chapter 82. After the Chu couple left, Xiao Su finished dealing with the matters in the study and walked towards Yushuan courtyard. Before he arrived, he heard laughter coming from inside. He frowned and stepped into the room. Xiao Ran, who was amused by Chu Qingyin's lame joke, saw his eldest brother coming in from the corner of his eye. He casually greeted him. "Eldest brother, I didn't expect Qingyin to be so knowledgeable at such a young age." Xiao Su walked to the pear-wood chair in the room and sat down. Xiao Ran was clearly in high spirits. He repeated Chu Qingyin's joke to his eldest brother. "Eldest brother, a banana was walking on the road. As he walked, he got hot and took off his clothes. Guess what happened to him?" "Ha ha ha ha, Xiao Su, Xiao Ran, ha ha ha, I can't take it anymore. My stomach hurts from laughing, Xiao Su, Xiao Ran, ha ha." In the end, he fell down. "Ha ha ha, isn't it funny?" Xiao Su didn't comment on his crazy fourth brother, Chu Qingyin. She never knew that Xiao Ran was so easily amused. Fortunately, she only told him one joke and didn't tell him all the jokes. "Qingyin, tell me another one. I've never thought that this kind of story was so funny." Xiao Ran said to her rudely. There were still 2 drops of tears at the corners of his eyes. They were from his laughter. Chu Qingyin clearly didn't want to talk to him anymore. Xiao Su calmly glanced at his second brother, who was staring at Chu Qingyin's dead body. He recalled what Chu Qingyin's father had said earlier and picked up the teacup beside him. He tapped the lid of the teacup and said thoughtfully, "I heard that Imperial Father is going to check your riding and archery homework?" Hearing this, Xiao Ran's smile disappeared, and his expression was no longer playful. "That's right. 3 days later, Imperial Father will test me on my riding and archery skills. Next month, it will be my chess skills." Xiao Su lowered his head and drank a mouthful of tea. The fragrance of the tea spread in his mouth and tongue. It was sweet, but it was slightly bitter when it went down his throat. He said unhurriedly, "Your mother has always placed great importance on your homework. In the next few days, you should stay in the palace and practice. Otherwise, if your grades aren't good, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to leave the palace." Xiao Ran originally wanted to protest. Even if he didn't practice hard, his grades wouldn't be bad. However, when he thought of his mother's strict requirements, he couldn't help but shut his mouth. He secretly looked at Chu Qingyan. If she said that he should visit her more often, he would definitely fight for the chance to come find her. But why was her gaze always on the weasel hair brush in his hand? Thus, Xiao Ran said angrily, "I know. This subject brother will go back and practice hard." After saying this, he left without looking back. When Chu Qingyan looked up, he was already gone. She couldn't help but feel puzzled. Why did he leave just like that? He didn't even say goodbye? However, there was still a big Buddha in the room. Chu Qingyan thought about how her father had just come back from outside with a plate and a weasel hair brush in his hand. If she remembered correctly, this was the weasel hairbrush that Xiao Su used the most. She didn't know if her father had gotten into trouble again. She braced herself and handed over the weasel hair brush in her hand. "I got this from my father. I'm sorry for causing trouble for you again. You can play with it." Xiao Su took another sip of tea before replying. Chu Qingyan scratched her head. "I can't accept a reward without any effort. How about I also tell you a joke?" Xiao Su didn't comment. Seeing that he didn't reply, Chu Qingyan took it as a silent agreement. The first day, the little white rabbit went fishing by the river. He didn't catch anything and went home. The second day, the little rabbit went fishing by the river again. He still didn't catch anything and went home. On the third day, when the little white rabbit just reached the river, a big fish jumped out of the river and shouted at the little rabbit, "You little bastard, if you dare to use carrot as bait again, I'll beat you to death." After Chu Qingyan finished, she couldn't help but grin. However, when she looked up and saw that Xiao Su was sitting there like a pine tree and wasn't amused by her joke at all, she couldn't help but doubt herself. Could it be that her ability to tell jokes had deteriorated? Or was his ability to laugh too much? What about the fourth day? Xiao Su put down his cup and asked. She didn't expect him to ask, but this question, Chu Qingyan was in a difficult position on the fourth day, the little rabbit still used carrots to fish. Xiao Su didn't wait for her answer and continued. This time, it was Chu Qingyan's turn to widen her eyes. Why? Because the little rabbit only had carrots at home. Xiao Su said seriously. Chu Qingyan was instantly thrown into disarray. When it came to the king of awkward silence, it was none other than the person in front of her. The next day, Father and Mother Chu were brought over as usual, but this time, they brought a few children. Chu Qingyan looked at Madame Xing and Madame Wang in front of her and frowned slightly. However, she smiled and greeted them politely. "Second aunt, third aunt, how have you been?" Madame Xing and Madame Wang were originally unwilling to come to King Ying's residence because they had always felt that Xiao Su's temperament was unpredictable, cold-blooded, and cruel. The main reason was that the rumors outside were too frightening, so before they came, they had thought about it for a long time. However, they saw that Father and Mother Chu often went in and out of King Ying's residence and ate there every day. Mother Chu had recently become round and smooth, and Father Chu was also full of vitality. They couldn't help but wonder what benefits King Ying's residence had given them. Old Madame Chu was also wondering if the King of England gave them special treatment because the Chu family was Chu Qingyan's maiden family. Then, could they take the opportunity to get some benefits? Therefore, with this idea, their greed grew bigger and bigger. Today, Madame Xing and Madame Wang insisted on coming to the prince's mansion with Father and Mother Chu. Due to Chu Qingyan's rising status in the prince's mansion and the Lord's protection, these servants who came to pick them up were only polite to the Chu family. Seeing that they wanted to come, they didn't stop them. They just needed to arrange an extra carriage. Therefore, Madame Xing and Madame Wang, who had tasted the sweetness, were all smiles and their faces were full of smiles. They thought that they could definitely find out how Chu Qingyin was doing in the King of England's mansion this time. Old Madame Chu had told them that if Chu Qingyin was doing well in the King of England's mansion, they must get some benefits for the Chu family. After all, Chu Qingyin was a member of the Chu family when she was alive and dead. However, if Chu Qingyin was not favored by the King of England in the King of England's mansion and was down and out, they should try their best not to have any relationship with Chu Qingyin. Otherwise, if Chu Qingyin accidentally angered Xiao Su, the Chu family would be in trouble. Thus, when Madame Xing and Madame Wang walked into the room where Chu Qingyin was recuperating, they could not take their eyes off her. Their gazes darted all over the room, causing Chu Qingyin to feel uncomfortable all over. Her expression immediately turned cold. She knew what they were up to. It was their specialty to take advantage of the situation. Chapter 83. This girl has such a sweet mouth. Actually, as long as you are fine, our Chu family will also be fine. Madame Xing covered her mouth with her handkerchief. If others didn't know the relationship between their family, they would think that they were very harmonious. However, Chu Qingyin could tell that she was implying that they were bound together for good or ill. Chu Qingyin and the Chu clan were like grasshoppers tied to the same rope, and neither of them would have a good ending. No, it should be said that if anything happened to her, the first thing the Chu family would do would be to kick her out. Chu Qingyin smiled and ignored her words. She ordered the servants to serve them tea. Madame Chu looked at her daughter awkwardly. She knew that she had brought trouble to her daughter this time. Chu Qingyin gave her mother a reassuring smile, then casually asked about the Chu family's situation. When Madame Wang saw this, she immediately seized the opportunity and began to complain about being poor. Little Qingyin, you don't know this, but recently, there has been an increase in the number of people in the residence, and we have been running low on money. Your third uncle and your brothers have been tightening their belts to survive. Chu Qingyin held her forehead. Was she implying that the Chu family was going to be poor because of her father and mother? But how much rice could my father and mother eat? Chu Qingyin looked at Madame Wang's oily face and remained silent. Yes, it's already summer, but no one in the residence is wearing summer clothes. A few days ago, old Madame almost fell ill from the heat. How sad. Madame Xing cried about being poor for the second time. Her voice and expression were as real as they could be. However, Chu Qingyin continued to remain silent when she saw that she was wearing the latest summer clothes that were trending in the capital. Madame Xing and Madame Wang didn't expect Chu Qingyin to be so calm. They looked at each other and didn't know how to continue the act. After all, no one would watch a one-man show. No matter how thick-skinned they wouldn't be able to carry on. When they were almost done, Chu Qingyin said with difficulty, after hearing the situation from my two aunts, Qingyin felt miserable and wanted to help. She saw her two aunts' eyes light up. She smiled slightly and continued in a sorrowful voice, but I have the heart, but I don't have the strength. Even though Qingyin was in the king's palace, she did not have a prominent status. It was also difficult for her to move around in this place. She was injured again and again, and the amount of medicine she drank was more than the amount of food she ate. I've been living a very... In the end, Chu Qingyin sighed and couldn't continue. Madame Xing and Madame Wang looked at Chu Qingyin suspiciously. They couldn't tell whether what she said was true or not, but it was true that she was injured and lying on the bed. Could it be that the King of England was really as cruel as the rumors said? He was even willing to hurt a young child like Chu Qingyin? Instantly, the two of them thought of the same thing and couldn't help but tremble. Seeing that she had achieved her goal, Chu Qingyan said a few more polite words, and then asked Xining to lead the two of them to the side hall to leave some space for her and her parents. It's mother's fault that they took the opportunity to make trouble for you. After Madame Xing and Xining left, Chu Qingyan's mother blamed herself. Chu Qingyan smiled and said, "Mother, it's useless even if you stop them. Once they see delicious food, flies will stick to it no matter what. You can't chase them away. So don't worry, I'll take care of everything." Chu Qingyan's mother sighed and reached out to touch her daughter's head. She said with relief and pity, "Children of poor families are able to take care of the family early. Children of poor families grow up early. It's been hard on you." Chu Qingyan leaned on her mother and said coquettishly, "It's not hard, not hard. As long as I'm with father and mother, even if it's hard, daughter will drink it and turn it sweet." Chu Qingyan's mother was amused by her and couldn't help but pat her back and coax her. After talking for a while, Chu Qingyan felt that the room was a little quiet. She opened her eyes and searched for her father for a long time, but she couldn't find him. Chu Qingyan's mother noticed her gaze and knew that she was looking for her father. She couldn't help but laugh. Perhaps he went to look for His Royal Highness again. Speaking of which, it's really strange. Why does your father hit it off so well with His Royal Highness? The moment he came to the prince's estate, he wanted to look for him. Chu Qingyan held her forehead. She also wanted to know where her father's strong self-confidence came from, since he always believed that Xiao Su was the purple-faced man who was saved that day. As expected, Chu Qingyan's father slipped away to look for his son-in-law again. When he returned, Chu Qingyan saw that he had a mysterious expression on his face. When she asked him why he went to look for Xiao Su, he only smiled and didn't say anything. Chu Qingyan felt that as long as her father didn't cause any trouble, she didn't care about anything else. This time, before Chu Qingyan's mother left, she said to her daughter, "In order to prevent them from using the opportunity to enter the estate to threaten you again, mother and your father won't come to visit you often in the future. Your leg injury is almost healed, so just take care of yourself." Knowing that her mother was thinking for her sake, Chu Qingyan was a little touched and a little reluctant to part with her. "Kai, remember to miss father often. Also, remember to make the scallion upside down miss father often." The somewhat sad atmosphere was dispelled just like that by her father's jest. Chu Qingyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she watched them leave the room. Meanwhile, Madame Xing and Madame Wang were sitting restlessly in the side hall. When Chu Qingyan's mother and son were about to leave, they immediately urged them to leave quickly, as if they would die if they stayed any longer. When she saw the expressions on Madame Xing and Madame Wang's faces when they left, Chu Qingyan only chuckled. She would benefit anyone but this turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest. As for the person in the study, ever since Chu Qingyan's father left, he fell into deep thought. The book in his hand didn't even turn a single page. It was still on the page when Chu Qingyan's father entered the study. Son-in-law, let me tell you a secret," Chu Qingyan's father said happily the moment he entered the room. Xiao Su was already familiar with his words. Perhaps the colorful cat in the residence had given birth, or the willow branches in front of the door had grown longer, or the stray dog's broken leg had healed. Yes, he didn't find it strange. It's definitely true this time, because this is the happiest time of the year. Chu Qingyan's father was completely immersed in his own world, but Xiao Su didn't intend to pull him out of it. Chu Qingyan's father, who was immersed in his own world, approached him and whispered something. Xiao Su's hearing was very good. Even though Chu Qingyan's father spoke very softly, he heard it clearly. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his expression was somewhat unreadable. As soon as Chu Qingyan's father finished speaking, he chuckled and winked at him. "I wouldn't tell an ordinary person. Son-in-law, perhaps father won't have time to visit you in the near future. You have to take good care of yourself. Don't be like Kai and always kick the quilt." Chu Qingyan's father nagged, looking reluctant to part with him. When Xiao Su finally came back to his senses, there was no one in front of him. He tapped his fingers on the table, thinking about the secret Chu Qingyin's father had told him before he left. In 3 days, it would be Tsai birthday. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.